Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all again. Welcome to day 2 of the conference. Thank you all for joining us. People are still coming through online, which is encouraging. What I wanted to say is we've had a huge amount of feedback from yesterday's session, all of which has been extremely positive, which has really inspired us to develop the framework for the next steps to follow on from this conference. And I'm really keen to stress that I don't think this shouldn't just be a talking shop, because there's plenty of opportunities to discuss these issues. What I want to come out of all of this is making it the first step in developing a sort of cross-Commonwealth, certainly cross-Caribbean partnership, and a series of actions to really transform the whole heritage landscape. And to recognise that there's a real opportunity here to transform attitudes and policies for heritage conservation across the islands, and demonstrate absolutely that investing in heritage is about a crucial economic driver of prosperity. So maybe once we've done the talking today, let's start getting on with it with some coherent actions. And that's what we'll be developing in the next week or two, an action plan that we will circulate to everyone who's actually expressed views or interest or actually just joined us online. Now, there are 2 sessions today. The first will be looking at the crucial issue of climate change and heritage with a case study from Dr. Shireen James Williamson from UWI. And after the break, there'll be the final presentation from Dr. Kerry Hall, also from UWI, on heritage tourism. And both should, I think, stimulate quite a lot of discussion, which again, we can feed back into the action plan. We'll then draw the threads together at the end of the session. And as before, as usual, the usual rules apply. So please mute your microphones and cameras to maximize our bandwidth throughout the session. But that's all for now, and I look forward to putting the threads together later this afternoon. So thank you very much indeed, and I'll pass you over to Brent, who will be moderating as he did yesterday at the sessions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Philip, and welcome everyone to day 2. We are incredibly excited to have 2 incredibly important discussions today about climate change, which Kira first talked about yesterday at the end of her talk with respect to the project with the University of Florida in Port of Spain and Trinidad and Tobago. And Shireen James Williamson will be speaking today on that issue within the broader context of climate science and heritage, which really is one of the greatest challenges that faces built heritage in the 21st century. And really, it is something that increasingly climate change, both on the short and long term, is increasingly in the public awareness and being discussed, but often heritage is left out of that. And really having scientists like Shireen engage in the conversations of how built heritage will be impacted by climate change, sea level rise, increase in hurricanes, is really at the forefront of management challenges in the Caribbean and across the world for all coastal and island stakeholders. And so we're incredibly excited to have her today. She is a senior lecturer in the Department of Geography and, she's a senior lecturer in the Department of Geology and Geography at UWI Mona in Kingston, Jamaica. She is a geologist by training with a BSc in Earth Science and a PhD in geology at UWI Mona. And she currently serves as Associate Dean for Undergraduate Student Matters in the Faculty of Science and Technology at UWI. She was recently a PI on the UNESCO International Geoscience Program grant, Bringing Geoheritage to Life, which works jointly with IGCP 692 for Geoheritage for Resilience, which again, this issue of heritage and resilience in the context of climate change is a crucial part of the discussion as we move into the 21st century. So Shireen, we really look forward to your talk today, and please share your screen and begin.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Brent, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to participate in this very, very important, I would call it a summit. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the challenges for Caribbean heritage and the future of climate change. I hope you find it interesting. I hope you find it useful. Some of the imagery may be related to your own location. It will show some destruction, and I do hope that it does not invoke any feelings of despair. And so I apologize ahead of time if it invokes any emotion negatively. I hope that this is instructional and that we can all learn from it. So within the context of this presentation, I'm going to just mention some climate change effects. I'm going to talk about the impact of climate change on built natural, archaeological, and movable heritage. I'm going to speak of some opportunities for resilience, make a couple of conclusions, and then I'll acknowledge a couple of people. So within the Caribbean, we are going to be or have been impacted by increases in temperature. We've been impacted by sea level rise. We already are. Some people may not notice it, but I'm sure the archaeologists who work along the coast, they're feeling it. And people who have homes and businesses and buildings along the coast are recognizing that there are some specific issues. There obviously is an increased frequency and intensity of hurricanes. We've been experiencing that. We've seen it. There's disruption in our wet and dry seasons. There is some coastal erosion, and of course, there is a loss of biodiversity, and we're talking about both in the marine and terrestrial environments. So what are some facts that we already know? We know that our temperature has increased by between 0.1 and 0.2 degrees every decade for the last 3 decades. We know that our rainfall patterns have shifted. And if you do community work and you have to go out into the community and talk to farmers and other people who are on the land all the time, you will recognize that they too are trying to adapt to this. Even in our everyday comings and goings, we are having a lot of disruption in our rainfall. Our dry seasons appear to be longer, and then we have these in-between rain periods that sort of just floods everything and creates problems. So a lot of what we're experiencing, you already know it. You already are experiencing it. And we know that over the last 30 years or so, there has been an increase in sea level by 2 to 4 centimeters per decade, okay? So what are the predictions for the Caribbean? It is suggested that our temperatures will rise between 1 and 5 degrees by 2100. It is suggested also or predicted that we will be 25 to 30% drier. I cannot even imagine that. And of course, drier and hotter. We are gonna have some additional issues with our rainfall patterns and our hurricanes and so on. And of course, it is expected that we will have, on average, a 1 meter sea level rise between the next 50 to 100 years. We're gonna have, with our storms, increased winds. The intensity of our hurricanes will be stronger, and we would potentially have them in greater frequency. So I'm gonna start off with hurricanes, and I start off with hurricanes because it is, I don't wanna say most destructive, but rather it is what we experience literally every year. And once we're approaching June, in fact, these days, once we're approaching May, we start to think, oh my gosh, because that's when the predictions come out that tell us how many storms we'll get and what their predicted intensities will be. And then in latter years, we've been finding that our hurricane season has extended beyond November. So now, you know, we're starting a little earlier than June and we're going beyond November. It's very nerve-wracking, especially if you have assets to protect. And I call this a complex hazard because with it comes the storm surge issues, the strong winds and high levels of rainfall, the increased humidity, the flooding, the landslides. All of these make hurricanes quite problematic. And as I went through this presentation, I just chuckled to myself because I've been doing disaster heritage related to earthquakes. And as I went through looking at all the effects, I'm like, boy, earthquakes not looking too bad now. But you know, it's one of these things we're gonna have to deal with, and I'm gonna show you some examples of why it is so challenging, and maybe you'll arrive at the same conclusion that I have. So basically, if you look at this graph, you will see that it is trending upwards. Let me see if I can get a pointer here. It's trending upwards. And of course, it is suggested here that 30% or more of our hurricanes are about category 3, but that number has also trended up over the last 30 years or so. This does not spell well for our buildings. If you look at this chart, and don't worry, after this chart, I think this is the most complex science you will get. We'll get a little bit more friendly after this. But I want you to recognize this is 1961, this is 1985, this is not, this is 1961, this is 1985, 2017. And what I want to point out is, if you look here in 2020, we have lots and lots of storms. We have many of them, and they're much, much lower, right? As to the science behind all of that, you know, we'll leave the climate scientists to work that out. But I just wanted to show you that the storms are engaging the Eastern Caribbean much, much more than it did in the past. This is 1985. See, Eastern Caribbean, a little clear, right? No tracks there. 1 or 2 tracks here in 1961. But certainly you can see in the last 5 years or so that we have experienced hurricanes that have hit the same series of islands consistently. And that's a fact. The strong winds, depending on our buildings, depending on the category hurricane, we're gonna move from minimal damage all the way to catastrophic. And what we want, or I mean, we would prefer not to have hazards, but you know, and we'd prefer not to have disasters, but these are not preventable in any way. But certainly we would prefer a tropical storm that's, you know, just passes through and leaves us alone. But then we've been experiencing categories 4 and 5 storms, which give us extreme and catastrophic damage. And if you think of what our historic buildings look like, it gives you an idea why we can move from minimal to catastrophic in one fell swoop. These are examples of our historic structures. Let's point out some of the things, and I don't want anybody to panic, but let's point out some of these issues. This is Headquarters House in Kingston. Nice awnings, nice wooden building. We have shingle roof. This is the interior, lots of balconies and awnings. If you look at this is a shuttle house in, I think in Barbados. Very nice building, made of wood. All of these are absolutely nice buildings. They're perfect. This is what I dream of living in. This is Devon House again in Jamaica, and Seville Great House. I tried to find some pictures that showed some of the features I wanted to talk about. And then these lovely windows on the exterior of this building. The name escapes me right now, but it starts with T. And of course, Manchester House. Now, when you have buildings like these, this already presents us with a challenge. We love these buildings and we want to see them and we want to preserve them. But when a category 4 or 5 runs through this kind of environment, what we end up with is just absolute destruction and tears. And it is very, very difficult, because we spend a lot of time and effort preserving them. We spend a lot of time and effort talking about them and touring people through them. And all it takes is a busy hurricane season to lose it all. This is what you end up with at the end of the day. And these are just examples of buildings that have similar roof, sort of pitch roofs. Their buildings, some of them are wooden. especially on this side here, a lot of it ends up being a mangled mess. And this is psychologically difficult for a lot of us to even imagine that we're going to go from something like this, or could go from something like this to something like that. And what you find is that once the storm comes, these windows, because what the hurricane winds do, it pushes and it sucks. And as it pushes and sucks, it's like a big vacuum cleaner just trying to rip all our heritage away. And this is one of our challenges. Our buildings, though they are lovely and they have stood the test of a lot of hurricanes, we are now recognizing that many of the facets make them so vulnerable that we run the risk of losing them. And I guess it's a double-edged sword. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a little bit. So if we go on, let's think about our historic towns. Our historic towns are on the coast, right? A lot of, we have Belize City. Belmopan was the, center of everything. Belize City is now very, very, very much in swing with all activities in Belize. All of our major towns are along the coast. Some of our islands, we cannot avoid our major towns being on the coast because we're almost all coastal, sometimes with another hazard in the center, a volcano. And then we add earthquakes to that equation. So our challenges are compounded because we're only talking today about climate change. We're not talking about the other hazards that impress upon us even greater risk. So within this context, we're looking at the impact of storm surge from because we're along the coast and what storm surge would do in terms of the coastal flooding. We're looking at saline air and water. These pose problems ordinarily, but then we have increased effects because during the storm, as the storm surge and the winds coming off of the sea, what you get is sea spray, and this sea spray comes with a lot of salty air and salty water, and a lot of things can become damaged as a result. If you have trees around, or even if you have projectiles in the air, it can break a window. All this salty water, all this salty air gets in. So we're talking about battening down the same way we batten our homes. And of course, trying to put such structures on a historic building, for argument's sake, becomes very, very problematic sometimes. And I agree with the conversations we were having yesterday about the engagement of our architects. We need our architects and civil engineers to now sit with us at one table as geoheritage heritage professionals to work through how we're going to retrofit. Because when you talk about retrofitting for an earthquake and retrofitting for a hurricane, it's two different kettles of fish. Sand blasting occurs because you have a lot of sand that is brought in, and this can damage your windows, it damages your paintwork, it damages everything. Right, and so it makes it very, very problematic because our buildings, our museums, everything is located mostly in our capital cities. And yes, we might say, well, let's move up onto the hill, but that presents us with some additional problems. So these are some examples of storm surge and storm surge effects. Look how high this spray is. And this building is, it's close to the sea, but there you can see along the edge here that there's a lot of erosion that has taken place. What you also get is an undermining of your foundation because the sand is being removed by all of this seawater. You can have the pummeling of water that takes out an entire section of a building. If you look here, you are seeing also where along this coastline, we're getting material being thrown up, and this material, as it's thrown up, damages this entire beachfront. This one I wanted to show because it has water. This is a fire hydrant right here. So this is nowhere exactly close to the sea, but this is now salt water. Imagine, and I'm trying to just show ordinary circumstances so that we can see how this would impact our historic structures. If you look here, you can see that there's quite a bit of water. The fire hydrant is almost covered. and we have infrastructure along this roadway. So not only will this roadway be affected, but anywhere that this water inundates. And then of course you can have issues that relate to undermining of just the coastal regions and prevent stability all along, right? So imagine if there was like a pre-Columbian site somewhere in this area, we would start to have some issues, but we'll talk about that in a few. These are before and after pictures of Dorian in Abaco Island. And if you look, you will see very nice greenery. Everything is green and beautiful. And you can see where along the coast, I'm going to show you the different one, you can see that erosion has taken place. This is skinnier than it was prior to the storm. And you can see the cleaned off areas along the coast, just to illustrate what happens during the hurricane. And then of course, in this particular example, you're seeing where the water, as it comes in through these inlets, has actually plowed through and even made these inlets much wider through the erosion that has taken place. And of course, you can't miss that it was all green, and now you can see spots of green because of where everything has been ripped off. And as I show you and mention the greenery, I want to talk about the impact on the natural environment, because yes, we have impacts on our buildings, and some of these impacts, I mean, you have to rebuild, but then is how you rebuild, yeah? But we also impact the natural environment. For example, in Dominica, their ecotourism was more or less destroyed after Maria, because you have the trails, there were landslides, the trees are gone. It's just in a mess. And so you find that economically there is a problem, because people would normally take hikes and your tourists would come in for this particular activity. And if you have no hiking trail with things to see, then you're just walking on dirt. And as much as dirt is beautiful, I'm a geologist, so I can make any dirt pretty. But I mean, really, you are losing the biodiversity. You've lost your plants, you've lost your animals. If you have thatch or wicker, you're losing that as well. And so your craft industry becomes affected. Why is that important? A lot of our islands depend on this craft to display some of our indigenous knowledge. A lot of this intangible heritage is passed down through just basket making and weaving. And if you are unable to find the materials to do this, how will you'll probably have to import it, but how else, how will you be able to pass this tradition on to generations who would like to learn it and be able to carry it on themselves? You know, I think of the loss of a basket. I remember when I was a child, my grandparents had donkeys, and there used to be a hamper on the donkey, and I used to find this so fascinating. But I've not seen a hamper in, I don't know, I know I'm dating myself or something, but I've not seen a hamper in ages. And imagine if you were never ever able to see a woven basket, simply because the material is no longer available and the local craft doesn't exist to have it happen. The landslides and the floods ruin the trails. You can see how a lot of here has been just simply scraped off. There was flood waters that would have carried a lot of dirt and soil into the area. And on top of all of that, you have community displacement. Community displacement not only impacts your heritage in terms of physical people being somewhere, believing and acting and behaving in you know, traditional ways, but now they're scattered all around. And so that aspect of community that once built up a lot of the heritage for that particular region, place, or town is now about to become absent. And so, you know, it really is an emotional thing to just think of all that could be lost. And yes, you can say, yeah, it's lost temporarily, it will all grow back. But also in the meantime, the ecotourism for example, the ecotourism tours that would have assisted persons in the community with jobs and helped to fuel the economy, as well as pass on your information and traditions to other people, now is in stasis for some, probably some extended period of time. So the economic repercussions for that, as well as the funding that you would have gotten from these tours that you would put back into the local community or back into developing the rest of the culture and heritage sector, that is now, and we already know we don't have enough money to do all the things we want to do in terms of our heritage spaces for mitigation and protection. So that is a serious problem. In terms of biodiversity loss, I have two images here. One is from Florida after Hurricane Matthew, and the other one is from Haiti after Hurricane Matthew as well. And you can see that the trees, they're gone. You have some bush, but we can't even tell if the bush is just toppled over stuff. So, if you had endemics, if you had indigenous species, I mean, animals have, a bird can't just fly to the next available tree, it doesn't work like that. So your endemic birds, this is a problem. Your endemic plants, and if you have no birds feeding on the plants and the fruits to help to propagate it across the island, you're going to have some problems there as well. And so it is very, very important that we start to think about, situations where we are hosting or holding seed or tissue banks to be able to propagate again some of our, because that's a part of our heritage, right? Some of our endemic species that, especially where they're used in folk medicine and so on. So with strong winds, with the floods, with mudslides, etc., we lose indigenous and endemic species. This has a direct effect on your folklore, on your folk medicine, on your mythology, because let's say, for argument's sake, all the cotton trees in Jamaica were to disappear. What would we tell stories about? Where would that funny sound come from? Although people were in fact cutting them down because of that strange noise that the beetle makes inside it, that people think are just ghosts. There is a lot that surrounds just the very little things that we have around. In Jamaica, there's a fear of lizards, right? Imagine if all the lizards disappear. I mean, what would we talk about in terms of that fear? Why that fear occurred? Because you won't have anybody having any issues with that anymore. Or folk medicine, a lot of the bush that your grandmother and great grandmother give you to drink when you have a headache, or put it on you when you have a busted knee, or some kind of sore problem. All of these belong to our islands or countries of the Caribbean. And if you lose these species, then we're losing a large part of our heritage, because the natural history, the natural heritage forms a lot on top of the substrate that we see every day: the sun, the sand, the sea. We have no tissue bank or seed bank for replanting and reestablishing of species. And we really should think about that, because that, in the same way we protect our buildings, in the same way we protect our sites and our monuments, and we protect geology, we should try to make sure that we can have some means of propagating whatever the species that we had before. It's very, very important, because I mean, who is going to talk about, yes, moringa is very popular now, but why is it popular now? Because somebody of old used it and they were able to bring that information to the fore. Some mint tea, some fever grass. Where would that information come from, and where would it be going? Who would it be going to? So that brings me now to increased temperatures. Increased temperatures, of course, will impact your hurricane intensity and frequency, because our sea surface temperatures will increase. Now, it also causes an increase in weathering of buildings and monuments, and this includes gravestones. We have historic cemeteries, right? And some of these cemeteries, the rocks will certainly deteriorate because of the increased temperatures, and then this kind of wetting and drying that will occur because of our erratic rain periods. So our buildings themselves are some of them are already deteriorating from just being out there. Some of them are 400 or 500 years old. But we have to also appreciate even some of our forts. that the rocks are in fact weathering. And as the temperatures increase and our conditions become erratic, we're going to have weathering issues. There's an increased incidence of pests. For example, if you have a museum or a library, you know of silverfish, that awful thing that I really hate seeing. Apparently it likes to eat the glue off of your books. But if you have high humidity and erratic temperatures, in essence, poor climate control in your spaces, you will end up with silverfish. And of course, you get other pests. Once the temperature is higher, they start to find homes and havens inside. You might find that your wicker baskets become nests for rats, and so on. And so we need to start thinking, I mean, how we're gonna start dealing with some of that. Because if you already have implemented climate control in your museums, or you haven't, it is because you know of the cost. The cost for climate control in our museums and archives, it's incredibly exorbitant. And so to now put in additional controls, better dehumidifiers, because of the climate that will be exerted on your space and on your tangible heritage, you're gonna have some you're gonna have to deal with some costs there. And the issue with that, and why I've pointed it out, is if we have to constantly be rebuilding after the storm, it means these infrastructure gets damaged every single year, whether because water has inundated it, salt has inundated it, or it literally just fell off because the section of wall had serious damage from, I don't know, could be a tree, could be strong winds. But these are costs that you don't expect to be replacing every year. But this is one of the challenges. Disruption in the wet and dry season, we get two extremes. We get very, very dry, and as a result, we get bushfires. And then on the other hand of that, we get very, very wet. And if you have very, very dry and then lots and lots of rain for almost a week, you are going to have saturation, you're going to have landslides, you're gonna have movement, you're gonna have places submerged in water. And these days, it's not taking a long time for that to happen. Why? Development. We have a lot more runoff because we're clearing a lot more slopes, we're building a lot more buildings, we're building lots of highways and roads, and the water has to go somewhere. So what would ordinarily be a 100-year flood that has a 1% chance of happening in any singular year, some places are experiencing this several times a year, right? So even the bushfires, some of them, they're so difficult to contain because everything is dry. And then there's the thought that somebody is catching these things afire every year or every so often. But once it is dry, lightning strike, almost anything can cause it to become a fire that is uncontrollable. Sea level rise is another issue. And I have this little video. I hope it's not going to take very long. I want you to see what is predicted by Mona GIS for a 1 meter rise in sea level for the downtown Kingston. This is the Digicel building for those who are Jamaican, and those who are not. This over here is the Bank of Jamaica, right? And so this is, I think, Air Jamaica building, and this is UDC. But essentially, this is the Kingston waterfront. So have a look. If it will start. Hang on. Ah, there we go. I slowed it down so you could see it better. So downtown essentially becomes all beachfront, all the way up a little bit up some of these main streets. I mean, you know, this is hypothetical, but it brings home the point that, you know, we can model some of this. And when we do, it allows us to see what the eventuality is and what our vulnerability is. So just by way of illustration, the impact of sea level rise on our heritage. We have coastal erosion. Why am I seeing captions? There you go. The impact is coastal erosion. And why is coastal erosion important or necessary? We have buildings that are along the coast, and we mentioned this already. We have archaeological sites that we have not yet explored, and those that we have, but we've not exhausted removing all the material from them. We have burial sites and cemeteries for countries that are relatively small. They don't have a lot of space for a lot of things. And so burial sites, burials are part of our heritage. The sites, the gravestones, the people, they connect each other, and they connect each other over centuries. When we lose these, that we're losing a large part of our heritage. We have saline intrusion as one of the issues, and of course, community displacement, which I discussed before. These two maps here of Jamaica represent two projects that I've been working on with George and Dolphy. And what you have here in the first one, these little circles, I don't know if you can see them very well, but these are some sites and they are along the coast. These two are in swamps, and these three are definitely, 4 of them are definitely along the coast. These ones are not only close to rivers, but they're also at sea level. And what this is telling us is that when we get an increase in our sea level, what you're gonna find is that these places are going to be washed by waves, so you'll get some erosion. Some of them will be submerged, so they will not be accessible in the way that we are able to access them now. And so we have to start thinking about that part of our heritage that we haven't yet completely explored or interpreted, and that we have things still left behind. In the second picture, this is basically showing you all the little black spots. I won't bother to explain the colors, but the little black spots, if you can see them, are all pre-Columbian sites. And these pre-Columbian sites, if you notice, exist along the coast. So if you can imagine the issues that would be created as a result of sea level rise on some of these, especially if they're not high, if they're at sea level. And then secondly, you have some areas that are in the upland, and some of these upland areas, they could have landslides that could also pose a threat to the sites. And I just wanted to lastly just point out that there is research that's taking place just talking about rising sea levels and the destruction of shell middens in prehistoric sites. And that our indigenous populations, if you look at this map segment of Guyana, you can see where they're expecting a lot of issues associated with sea level rise along these particular areas. This will impact also rice growing areas, because with sea level rise, there's an influx of seawater, which is salty. This does not bode well for agriculture. So there are, and remember that growing rice and such in the Demerara area and parts of Guyana, it's heritage in itself. So that's also at risk. And last but not least, on sea level rise, this is just showing you by city what is expected to happen in terms of the mean sea level rise projections. And I mean, we have some 0.84s over in these parts of Central America, but certainly along most of our islands, we're gonna get somewhere between 0.7 and 0.8 meter rise in sea level. This is tragic, to say the least. And I mentioned saline intrusion, and I just wanted people to appreciate what I'm talking about. So this is your regular sea level, right? And there's this interface between your seawater and your land and, you know, groundwater. But we don't want to get into that. It's not a geology lesson. But just to show you that with an increase in sea level, that interface with your, where your seawater is at the coast, it moves inward. And having moved inward, it means if you have buildings with foundations that will be sitting, because you don't see what's happening under here, you see what's happening up here. But while you're watching what's happening up here, there's a lot that's happening down here. And that creates problems like this. We end up with salt in our foundations, in our basements, right? This is a crypt. You can see there's a sarcophagus here. Your concrete starts to break away and you end up with swollen rebar, which weakens your structure. We end up with your brickwork peeling off. Look at this one. This rebar this is falling apart. It's already swollen, it's rusted, and it's falling apart here. This column that's obviously holding up something, you can see all the salt around here, and all that it will serve to do is continue to deteriorate what's happening here. It will certainly deteriorate your wood faster than it will do your concrete. And so whatever this is holding up is in peril. And just in case you're wondering, this is a brick column. And this brick column, you can see all the salt deposits, not only on the ground, but also on the actual column itself. And then last but not least, I left this one for last because if your ground or beneath the surface is saline, it will, by capillary action, come up to your floor height or your surface, whatever. And if you have items on the ground, so let us say these are representing your museum exhibits, for argument's sake, they're going to get salty and they're going to break down as a result. All right. I think my time is coming to an end, so I'm going to hurry up. This, in terms of movable heritage, this is the Wayani Malone Museum in the Bahamas. Of course, once water comes into your space, you're going to have damage. And this damage sometimes represents not only the debris that comes in, but also the mold growth that occurs afterwards. And so you might not be able to salvage if you can't get in very quickly, which is part of the other problem, because the space, sometimes where the location is, you can't access it immediately after the storm. Also, some of our legislation and our emergency systems don't allow for people to be up and about to go and look at heritage. We should be, as heritage professionals, persons in charge of museums and heritage sites, we should have a badge that tells us, I think Barbados has it, a badge that says we're emergency workers, because our heritage at risk is an emergency in itself. And so we should be allowed to go and see what has happened to our space and on our artifacts and so on, so that we can begin the recovery sooner than later. Here are a few images. Don't worry, these two are of the Louvre, but they are hypothetical. This was an artist's representation of what flooding in the Louvre would look like. I nearly had a heart attack when I saw it, because I was like, well, maybe I'll show everybody and make them get the same feeling. But the idea is that we cherish these things and we look at them all the time, and we say how important they are. But then the people in charge of the purse really don't want to help us to make sure that they're protected. And then you end up with catastrophe and they wonder why, These are historic books in a reserve section of a library. Notice they're moldy, all kind of fuzz growing on them. Some of these books probably will never be opened again. This is inside a library. This is knowledge, literally, that's gonna go down the drain. This is from inundation by mud in these two, this one and this one. And this is Hurricane Sandy. It brought sand into this space. And I didn't mean it for a pun, but I mean, it really is kind of, kind of shocking just to see some of this. So what are the implications of heritage loss? Obvious psychological effects. I'm sure some of you are probably a little mad at me for showing you all this drama, but it's where we have to start. We have to start from what we could lose to be able to set things in motion. One other impact is absence. The building is gone, but we need to represent that the building was here. So we need to be able to represent that through pictures, maybe through simulations. Brent knows a lot about these 3D simulations of buildings. And so it is important for us to ensure that even though the space is there or the artifact is gone or whatever, that we make sure that we make that absence present. Because if we don't, we're going to have gaps in the narrative. And some of these gaps get filled in by myth. And what we want is for people to hear the story in its entirety, regardless of what people think about their heritage. We need for people to be able to talk about it from their own point of view and add to that narrative and make it a wider, larger, more important story. The loss of irreplaceable items, some things we're not going to be able to replace. Loss, we need to document, but the loss of documentation is very, 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 very important. It is one of those impacts that no matter what we do, you cannot make absence present if you don't have the documentation to help to move things along. Mitigation and retrofitting, some of that has to be done. How? We have to work with other professionals who can help us along with that. In the process of evolution, geosites, for example, like places that are constantly being made, like where you have volcanoes, those spaces are constantly being made. So, you know, how do you protect and preserve? How do you record? What do you do? Because on the one hand, it's destruction, but on the other hand, it's representing an important part of your heritage, the heritage of the earth, terra firma. Relocation is an implication. You might have to move a site. You might have to move it brick by brick. The university chapel was once a rum still. I tell students that and they ask me, where's the rum? But it used to be a rum still, moved block by block to the current location and reassembled into something else. And the signage and information is there. The high costs of preservation to rebuild is another implication of loss. The cost to replace an historic building is really, really high. But then how do you replace the building? Are you going to build one exactly as it was before? That's one of the conversations I think we need to have. And vulnerability assessments. We need to have those kinds of assessments and have them early and have them within a context that will allow us to start putting value and putting various things in place to avert or at least reduce our loss. I wanted to show this as I spoke about loss because this is the Dominica post-Hurricane Maria disaster assessment report. And if you look at this is from the culture section. It's a lot of money, a lot of time and effort, and a lot that's lost to the public. Cultural and research institutions, movable heritage collections and repositories, a lot was damaged. And a lot of what is damaged, you can't put them back in. And of course, as I spoke to you about basket weaving and other crafts, the craft market was severely damaged. So, you know, where you depend on things like this, you have to put infrastructure back in. Look at the costs, the losses that were associated with just intangible cultural heritage alone. You know, so there's a lot that we have to digest in terms of how we treat with our heritage and these disasters as we approach climate change. But I wanted to say, and this is not in any way trying to say, you know, it's okay because we're not alone. I'm just pointing out that other places have similar issues associated with climate change. There are lessons learned or lessons being learned across the globe that can help us, you know, to work things through. And I think one of what we're doing now is one of those fora that will allow us to start thinking about what we can do, because I don't know, we can't throw our hands in the air because a hurricane might come and you know, knock down the same building that we spent millions of dollars putting up last year. But, you know, we have to recognize that this is happening and threatening everywhere and everyone. And as a result, we're experiencing some of these issues. So we have to act now. Last, I think I'm on to my last 2 slides. Opportunities for resilience. We have to inventory. We have to make an inventory of all our structures and monuments. It was very, very difficult to find things online because I couldn't find an inventory of historic sites or heritage sites. Maybe I'm not looking in the right places, but our islands are not showing us what they've got. We have to identify vulnerabilities. We have to determine the value of the potential loss. The powers that be needs to know that if we lose the craft village of island X, of town X, of city X, that we will lose this much revenue, which is this percentage of GDP. We need to start making those connections and have them fund us according to what we are contributing. We need to make some hard decisions. We might have to relocate, we might have to rebuild, but when we relocate, are we relocating, when we rebuild, are we going to, if the building was wooden, are we gonna make it into metal? Are we gonna make it to look exactly like it was before, but using different materials? We need to start thinking about that kind of thing and documenting the entire process. We need to bolster our disaster plans or prepare them. We need to arrange safe storage for movable items. We need to create replicas where possible, so that we can have those on display and have the items that are vulnerable put away in these safe storage locations. And please, please, please document your post-disaster. If the building was damaged, if the roof came off, all of this information goes into whatever mitigation steps you put in to rebuild your building or to not use when you're rebuilding your building. So we need to have documents of this post-disaster, every single segment of your building. I mean, within safe limits, of course. And so our major issues, our major challenges, location. It is because of where we're located. We're not gonna stop getting hurricanes and we're gonna get them frequently. We don't have enough money to rebuild and redo a lot of things. So we have to set the infrastructure in place so that we can get the funds to do the things that we need. And of course, as I said before, value loss. Our structures are already vulnerable, and some of them are vulnerable because of neglect or misuse. We need to organize that. We need to fix that. Our building design, we already have buildings that by their very design and nature are vulnerable. So we need to know how to treat with that. The structural and historical integrity, if you rebuild a building, not with the same material that it was built with in 1875, we're going to lose the historical integrity. But once we document, and we have to we have to have a conversation about that. And of course, the effect of catastrophic loss on economic development. The reality though, is that we have to tell ourselves that we might have total loss regardless of our preparation and our mitigation. And it's just one of those challenges that we're going to have to deal with that we may not be able to get over. So thanks to Georgianne for all her help in helping me with all of these diagrams and figures and pictures. And thank you. Hope I wasn't too long and boring.
Shireen, thank you so much. I think everyone here can just sort of understand why the way that you make this content so accessible to people who aren't climate scientists and geoscientists is incredibly impactful. And you know, I always think to myself, wow, it'd be great to get you in front of a student, you know, students in our line of work much more often, so we can illustrate these challenges from, you know, from the climate science side of things. I selfishly could probably ask you questions for the next half hour, but I'll open it up to the floor here in Barbados and on Zoom for any questions that anyone would like to chime in. You're all they're all stunned here. And
Yeah, I'm really sorry if I made anybody too emotional, and if any pictures depicted any place that was too familiar.
we've got Lorianne on Zoom. You got.
I wanted to first say thank you so much. You could tell that there was a lot of work put into your presentation. That wasn't a 10-minute get-together situation there. So thank you so much. It was so informative. I appreciate it. I like the way that you closed out saying that regardless of what you do, sometimes we just cannot. And I like the fact that you presented, this is what we can do, let's do our best. And I wanted to offer also just a philosophical thought, because I am a philosophy major, to that is that in the universe, well, the universe was ordered, right? And so in the world, there is order. And we can see throughout history that there have been periods of eradication. And I strongly support what you stated, that there needs to be some type of consortium with all people in power to sit down and say, how can we, how should we, how do we move forward and guard what we have? And so I just wanted to, again, thank you for all of that lengthy, hard work, and to add that thought that, you know, some things turn out the way they do, just like you stated. And then, you know, it may look to us on the surface as loss, but the universe, regardless if you believe in evolution or greater power, has its way of working things out, and so does nature. So thank you.
Brent, I'm sorry I took too long.
No, not at all. No, I messaged you to keep going on your phone while you were talking and saying you ran out enough time. So no, that was absolutely fabulous. Seriously. We've got a few in the room. Peter Stevens.
Yes. If we assume that both in terms of cultural practice and physical cultural heritage, the rate of change being so rapid at the moment, that there is going to be permanent loss to both certain cultural practices and physical structures. There's going to be permanent loss. Is not then the most important role right now is to record those elements that are most vulnerable in a realistic, cost-effective fashion. That we need to start recording so that when that loss occurs, the data can be at least part temporarily. It may ultimately be that certain cultural practices are reduced to tokenism, where they're no longer relevant culturally, as happens throughout time anyway. But we still are able to practice it to a degree as a form of exhibit. And, and the structural loss, at least we are retaining the methodology and the design. Some structures that would not be authentic, there would be no purpose for reconstruction. But the data collection is something that needs to start immediately and at the most vulnerable points, because we really don't know when the most destructive elements of climate change are going to kick in. It could start.
You hear that, okay, Kareem?
Yeah, and I agree. We have to record things. There's no doubt about it. If we don't record them, and yes, I agree that some things may not be relevant, but what we have to try to do now is record them, because a lot of what we do, for example, with our lime mortars and lime buildings and some of our various bits of art and textures and so on, they're old things, they're indigenous things, they're old style of doing things, but people are subscribing to them, and we have to have that kind of material accessible to people who may desire to look back into history or back into their heritage 100 years from now to see what was being done and how it was being done. And the only way that can happen is to record it and to find some way to keep it into perpetuity for those to come. It is because people kept things into perpetuity while we're still able to see a lot of techniques and learn them and within our current society.
And I'll just sort of, jump in. Shireen, you said that you had a hard time finding heritage sites on the internet, essentially. And I think that's one of the critical parts of mapping, is to get these sites and the bounds of these sites into a GIS layer that then you can run simulations like you showed in Kingston, because without proper geospatial location of these sites, you really can't understand the vulnerability and the risk, because all the climate science is coming and filtered through those algorithms to understand the vulnerability of those sites.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got another online. Miguel, you had your hand raised.
Hi, hello, good morning, Brent, good morning all. Miguel Pena here, immediate past Executive Director of the National Trust. How are you all today?
Hi, Miguel.
Hello, hi, how are you? Wonderful presentation, Professor. I just wanted to say that I think that documenting is so extremely important, because that takes you then to another level that I often don't hear about in the Caribbean, and that is, once we're documenting, once we have a very good inventory of our heritage properties, we can use that as an extremely powerful tool to lobby insurance companies to insure or create special categories of insurance coverage for our heritage properties across the region. It's something that's so interesting. We have some insurance companies, I'm not going to name any of them, obviously, but there is one in Barbados that insures classic cars. Well, that's wonderful, but most people don't live in a classic car. There are hundreds of houses, thousands of houses in Barbados, and indeed across the region, tens of thousands of houses that are heritage houses. They are 50+ years or more, and they do not get that special insurance that I think ought to be given. But I think the way we need to do that is we need to create these inventories, and I fully support that. What I'd like to say with regards to recent disasters, Barbados, of course, was impacted by Hurricane Elsa. And what was so interesting is that many of the modern buildings in Barbados were severely damaged, if not destroyed. There were several chattel houses, some of them about a century or so old, which actually survived. One tragic example was that one of the survivors was a small chattel, and it survived the impact of the hurricane. It was later bulldozed by the Ministry of Health, which is extremely sad. But nonetheless, the point is that the architectural technology, the gable roofs, stood up to Hurricane Elsa. Well, that's just my contribution. Again, congratulations, excellent chat.
Yeah, thanks. There's a propensity after disaster to go through the bulldozer, unfortunately. And then some people think, oh, well, this is old. What's it doing here? Let's just level the whole thing and, put up some nice buildings. And it is so unfortunate. I've been telling my husband we should make our house look like one of those fretwork and all. He's not taking me on. But it's very sad that within the context of our community, that there are so many people who still don't value. They still don't value some of these historic structures, regardless of how small they are. And what they also exhibit for us are some building techniques in terms of why the gable didn't come tumbling down and why it wasn't blown away like all the other buildings. And so these are some of the things we have to check on and some of the things we have to test, because it's this knowledge that we can then transfer into our current situation to make ourselves less vulnerable, in other words, more resilient.
We've got one from the room, Shireen.
Oh, yeah.
It's from Peregrine.
Thank you, Shireen, very much for an extremely cogent and very sobering talk, which gives us all great pause for thought.
I have 2 points. One is that the Commonwealth Heritage Forum, one of our principal focuses is to build a register of buildings at risk around the Commonwealth. And we're very much aware that the Caribbean is one area where there are many buildings at risk for exactly the reasons that you've set down. And on a non-built heritage question, but just one that occurred to me, you mentioned the need to have the ability to replant where planting is lost. Is there a plant bank of species on the Caribbean islands? I know there's one at Kew, but is there one more locally or elsewhere?
I don't know of a plant bank, of a tissue or seed bank. I think there was one being done in Cuba, but I'm not sure if it's just for Cuba or if it has collected things from across the region. But we have university spaces that do biotechnology where we could potentially, and we have scientific research councils across the region. There is some way we can start to store, stuff from Jamaica could be stored somewhere else, and stuff from other places could be stored in Jamaica and Cuba and other places. But right now, there isn't such a facility that, we had Hurricane Ivan that decimated banana in many places. If that were endemic species, or I don't know, nutmeg or something. I mean, imagine a Grenada without nutmeg. I mean, it wouldn't be much of a spice island. So it is something that we have to start looking into because it's part of our heritage. And if we don't start preparing those things, we're going to be very, very sad one day, and our labels won't make any sense.
Thank you.
Myron, online.
Thank you very much, and greetings to all. I'm participating from the U.S. Virgin Islands, former senator and former director for historic preservation and archaeology for the territory. Professor, I just have to express to you our grateful thanks for the work that you did in putting this together, putting this documentation of the impact of global warming, hurricanes, and other disasters have had and will have in the near future. And I'm very interested in how your research material and findings can be published and shared with other island nations, especially those of us in the cultural community who continue to advocate, to request, to beg our governments to act accordingly to the importance of our cultural heritage and the loss of it. You looked at museums, for examples, and collections, but then you have the private family collections that are being lost, that go into these depositories. How can this work be packaged, published, and provided to many who are not here with us today?
Well, we've been considering a book, but book writing, as some of you who write books might know, it's not so easy, and then you have to find a publisher. But there are some considerations for writing within the context of an audience that is as broad as this, because a lot of our work goes into academic journals. So for sure, I think it's part of the conversation that we probably need to have going forward from this forum, that we have some tangible bits of information that will come out that is written, sort of not layperson, but certainly within the context of heritage professionals, and how, best practice and what to look for, what to see, and how to, I think that might be very, very useful. But we have considered a book, and we're trying to see how that outline will work.
But this material is going on YouTube, is it not?
Yeah, so this will be posted through the forum's website at the end of the forum. Yeah.
Beyond the forum's website, inform ministries of culture, ministries of the environment. This material is all available for them to see and share.
Absolutely.
Said that enough on this forum.
Yeah, so this will be shared at the end through the forum's website. Everyone will get an email with a link to it. But on that point of disseminating this information, particularly to the public, those visualizations that you had in Kingston, and then the sea level rise mapper from the north coast of South America, I believe. Those are sort of the visualization tools that you can really connect with people that don't ring true in the same way that charts and graphs do. And that's why, using 3D GIS as I've done at Mona is sort of critical for that engagement piece, and really could be done on a broader scale throughout the region.
Yeah, totally.
Marlene.
Hi, good day. I am not certain how many people are online from the Bahamas. I just want to acknowledge and to say thank you so very much. But I wanted to share an example of what you said in terms of Dorian. Well, the whole talk, but I had some children, after people were displaced, families were displaced in Grand Bahama and Abaco, families in Nassau, I think many people had houses filled with people. And my brother took in his in-laws. And that Christmas, I just had the neighbors over. I'm trying to say this without crying. I had the neighbors over, and the children looked at the trophies and the certificates of my nephew and said, we don't have any certificates. And the impact of an island, picture one of our islands with no family Bibles, no certificates, all of the history just was washed away. It just hit me. I realized, what you're talking about is very real, and we experienced it. And all of us have experienced it in different ways in different Caribbean islands. But what happened in Grand Bahama and Abaco, literally a whole island with everything that was washed away.
Yep.
So thank you. And I happen to be a psychologist that's only been in this space for about a little over a decade. And now I'm realizing more and more why I'm here.
Yes, for sure. It is very heartbreaking. And thanks for your contribution. Thank you
so much.
Mr. Khan, please.
Yeah. Good evening, and thanks very much. And thanks to our presenter for a wonderful presentation that's very comprehensive and detailed. Comment and question. The comment I have is that the Caribbean is one of the most disaster at risk regions in the hemisphere, from geotechnical issues of earthquakes, volcanic issues to climatic with hurricanes and climate change. So our built heritage is very much at risk, and step one, I think there's some risk assessment on these elements needs to be done. Step two, I really think key messages to our 4 key stakeholders are critical. One, our political decision makers to understand the built heritage. So when our consultants do the assessments, the key message is both the economic and also the policy value to our built heritage, to our politicians especially, and the importance of implementing action on a timeline, not as basically, political speak, but timeline-based action planning. The second level is our technocrats and our public systems, be it our Ministry of Planning and our built heritage agencies. And I don't think our built heritage agencies really have the power. I think it's our Ministries of Planning and our town planning agencies are important, and they need to be spoken to in a specific way about built heritage to add to their action planning programs. The third element is our development interests. The Caribbean is either made up of 2 plantations. One, the state, which is the owners of a lot of the built heritage, and also our private sector, who are also the big owners of our built heritage. And tied in there, I want to also put a pitch for archaeological heritage is underneath all of that too, or above that. And these developers, both the state or the private developer, are the ones who are most at risk for heritage to either be lost by knocking it down or converting it into something that doesn't have authenticity. And UNESCO talks about authenticity as an important element for heritage sustainability. And the fourth sector I think is critical for us to have is the public who are decision makers, both politically and also the ownership of their built heritage. And built heritage, not in terms of, as we talked yesterday, not loving not only the past, but also loving the future. And also in putting a sense of education and aesthetic values, that our built heritage is a value to us when it comes to the voting day. But also, we also care when we pay a contractor or pay an architect or pay someone to do something, that we have the necessary codes above us, but also within us to say that we're gonna protect and care for what our heritage is. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Khan. That was very, very important. Thank you.
One in the room.
Sorry, the question I have is to our speaker is that, do you see any of that happening in your case study, in Jamaican case study per se? Is there a real movement at the political level in terms of heritage, the technocrats and the developers, both the state developers and the private sector developers, that they really take heritage seriously? Thanks. And also risk management of disasters?
You know, I think it's mixed, because you have some developers who will develop close to an historic space, and they respect it, and you know, they try to make sure that they're working within the buffers. And then you have those that they just need the land, and they will stop at nothing to get it, so they offer the highest price. And then next thing you know, this building is taken apart and something new and tall is going up. People are talking about a new 26-story building. So the landscape is changing, and people are not changing the landscape and looking at how it's impacting everything else that's around it. And it's unfortunate, because there's this thing that they use at NASA where they do sort of mirroring. So you would see what a particular feature or structure would look like on the ground when you put it in, to see it with respect to everything else that's around. And I think our developers, if they're honest, and if our political directorate, who give the authority for these buildings to go on, if they allowed these kinds of models for the public to see, some of these buildings would not go up. And yes, you know, I don't have anything against architects. You have to be creative, and you have to display what your talent is, but you must recognize that some buildings just doesn't fit in a particular landscape. And once you start to mix these things, you're losing the integrity of a space. So you have a historic district, and all of a sudden you have a 26-story building just dropped in the middle of that. I think the public deserves to know what the landscape will look like, what shadows will be cast, what, you know, wind speeds will be at the ground level when you have these tall buildings set in the space that it wasn't meant for. I think we deserve to know what this, with all the technology that's available to us, we need to know what's available. And I think because we're trying to fuel the economy with building starts, we are not thinking of the repercussions of the loss of the integrity of the landscape, because they're not looking at the landscape in totality. So there's for example, there's a particular street that has, in a residential area, all the houses had a similar look, and they were all single level houses. And overnight, you now have a single level house and a 5-story building right next to it, which impacts, on the one hand, privacy, yeah, but on the other hand, it just doesn't fit. You know, so the zoning that is being put in for us to be able to have these kinds of structures just littered around the landscape, it makes it very, very difficult for preservation, conservation, or even to teach the community that these older buildings are important, because you're knocking down the modern heritage to put up, you know, something more modern, you know, and I think that's where the difficulty comes in. We're obliterating green space to put in some of these structures. You know, yes, you'll have a few trees in a parking lot of this nice high rise, but I don't know, other than the financial gain to the developer, what is it worth? You know, I don't know, but that's my personal feeling. I don't work for government, and I'm told I work for the university, and I can say a lot of things. So, so I said it.
Well, I'm adding you to my tour of architecture schools with Sir Henry and Pat from yesterday. So we also need to get you on the faculty of a heritage management school. Philip has a question.
That's by far the best, the most comprehensive presentation I've seen on the whole issue of climate change and heritage. So well done. I think that's absolutely brilliant.
Thanks, Sir Philip.
One of there seems to be a great emerging international awareness about all of the risks of climate change, but almost always the argument is attached to the natural environment, loss of biodiversity, the effect on polar bears in the Arctic or the African savanna and the species there. It's very rarely, if ever, related to the loss of heritage sites around the world. And one of the things that made a huge difference to the sort of impact on the environment was a series of programs by David Attenborough on the BBC, which got international recognition, not just on climate change, but also things like plastic in the oceans. So what we need is, I think, you on the BBC talking about these issues, or an international celebrity who can bring out these issues and make people much more aware of the terrifying issues that we'll face in the future. And it's the sort of thing that perhaps Prince of Wales, actually, in the UK, might well be interested in doing. But we need to sort of mainstream these arguments and not just think about the environmental issues. It's about the impact on global heritage.
Yep. Sir Philip, it's the connection. We're not making the connections between our natural heritage and just the plants and animals that are around. And I think one of the reasons it's so apparent in the Caribbean is because with every animal or plant, there's a story. They're never in isolation. And once you can connect that story to the people and you put I'm going to say the brand of heritage on it, it then starts to resonate because they already know why they're afraid of lizards and they don't want a lizard around them. And I think that is shared across almost the whole Caribbean in terms of part of the folklore. But within that context, we have stories about them. We have Anansi stories. We have all of our stories from when we were children that eventually ended up in small books. And so we, in a real way, we just need to connect that natural history to the tangible heritage so that people can now be able to see that, you know, the stories actually mean something and we're going to lose this thing. And this is how we need to help ourselves. Because it makes us resilient. I mean, you know, a lot of the mythology, a lot of the stories, a lot of the anecdotes, you know, it is because of our connections with the land. A lot of our literature from the Caribbean, they have descriptions of the landscape, you know, and it's because we have that connection with the landscape. And if we continue to respect our environment through our literary works, through our storytelling, through just our everyday coming and going, we can send this message and send it well. The problem is, as somebody told me, that we're all telling the story and there are lots of storytellers. The problem is we don't have enough story listeners, and our political directorate might be some of those persons who we need to give the story, but we have to sit them down and make a concerted effort to give them the story and let them appreciate what is going to be missed because they've missed the story.
So we're just going to hop on Zoom for the next question. Is that Andrea?
Yes, Brent, thank you. Thanks, Shireen, for your presentation. I missed a part of it, but the part that I did catch was very interesting, and I gather from everybody else that it's very interesting. Stemming from what you're saying, I wanted to make a point about partnerships because I think this is where we fall down in the culture sector, particularly. We don't tell the stories that you are talking about. We don't communicate what the value that's there, but yet we expect persons to just jump up and automatically be supportive of what we're doing when we're poorly communicating what we're doing. So at the same time, we say, yes, they're tearing down a building, but very often they don't even know anything about what they're doing. So we need to be better at the stories we're telling. And climate change is one way we can use, we can tell important climate stories in communities across the region so that we can get communities to buy on more. The final thing I wanted to say is that there's an initiative that's happening now with UNESCO and SEDIMA and CARICOM Secretariat. And I know that many of the persons here are aware of that initiative because UNESCO reached out to the different countries. In total, 23 countries participated in a situational analysis that was done. It's stemming from a meeting that happened in Barbados in 2010, where SEDIMA and UNESCO tried to bring together the disaster management agencies with the culture agencies to have a discussion and to start having an integration, a better integration of culture in national planning. Culture in national planning for natural hazards and climate change. So from that, the CARICOM Secretariat took on that initiative, and a team of consultants was hired that developed a situational analysis in relation to climate change and natural hazards for 23 countries in the region. And from that, a plan of action that was developed that is to be discussed by the Regional Culture Committee at their next meeting. I'm not sure when that is, but it basically identifies key areas that countries, based on this analysis that was done, key areas that countries needed to work on and move forward, and what were the actions that needed to take place in order to better align disaster management planning and culture at the national level and also at the regional level, and where there were opportunities for funding moving forward. So that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Great information. Thanks, Andrea.
Andrea, if you can you drop a link or the name of that report in the chat so everyone can access it?
The report is not finished yet because it has to be validated by the Regional Culture Committee first, and then it's something that will be made available.
Got it. Well, we'll all look forward to that.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
From the room, Peggy. Penny, sorry.
Hi, it's Penny. I'm here in Barbados. Thank you, Shireen, for an extraordinary presentation. I felt my blood pressure rising as I listened to it. And then it went down again as I started thinking, what do we do about this? And as a filmmaker and an environmentalist and someone involved in heritage work, I see something as I mull through COVID years, that what is happening is that the artists of the region are now the ones who are going to step forward to work with the scientists. I do not see enough communication. Many of our writers are writing about this. Shakira Bourne, for example, Josephine and the Sea. Many of our writers are writing for young children about these issues you're talking about. And we need to work, artists, filmmakers, and writers need to work with the scientists to get the message out to the population. Because people are watching videos and programs and films like never before. And this is where you get to them. This is the only way you can get to them. If this damn pandemic goes on forever, people are still going to be glued to their computers, their cell phones, and to their televisions. And this is where we need to form multicultural committees with scientists to get this message across. And I see many possibilities with filmmakers. Filmmakers are not being utilized enough for that in this, and neither are our fiction writers who are writing about this all the time. There are books out there coming out in the last 3 years that are mind-blowing in this context. And we need to get this information out jointly with the scientists of the community. I think this is the only way forward for us now. Otherwise, I think we're doomed, frankly. Thank you.
Yeah, agreed.
Online, Miguel, you had another question.
Hi, hello, yes. Just a point and a couple of points actually for Professor Williamson with regards to climate change and heritage. Maybe you can tell me about what goes on in Jamaica, but here in Barbados, ironically so, several of our hurricane shelters are heritage buildings. meaning they're churches or church halls. And some of these churches were built in the immediate post-emancipation era. And some of them are incredibly solid. And I think that, and I'd like to echo a point there made by Andrea with regards to synergies. I think one important synergy right there is the fact that so many of our heritage structures serve as disaster shelters. And maybe you can comment if that is the case also in Jamaica. That's point one. Point number two, I've heard some comments with regards to various reports being written. And often these reports are not then reproduced for the layperson. For instance, in Barbados, the list of listed buildings appears in the town planning physical development plan. And unless you actually have a copy of that, you're not going to see it because, for instance, that is not on the Barbados National Trust's website. So you can't find that, for instance. So a lot of people out of ignorance do not actually know if they are next door to a listed building. I think there needs to be better communication. And I think we need to do a better job within the heritage industry of taking a lot of this information that are written in these reports and actually just publicizing them in layman's terms, layperson terms, so that the public can be better informed. I think that's one very key step that we need to make. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Miguel, we have similar situations in Jamaica where we have church halls and schools as shelters. These are usually rock solid places, and so they're quite ideal for such situations. In terms of the conversations, other than the fact that they're used as shelters, and other Jamaicans in the audience can correct me or help me along here, there is no other synergy other than the fact that people are housed there until when they're able to move back to their homes. So yes, it is an opportunity to share some heritage, but you know, I'm not too certain how that will work, but certainly I agree. That's where some conversations can take place, because then you can go back and check on people who stayed in that particular facility and be able to help them to piece back their own heritage where they've lost everything or some things that, you know, connect them not only to their past, but to each other. So yeah, I think the synergy there is quite useful.
All right, one last question from Maxine.
Good morning, good morning.
Morning.
Dr. Shireen, thank you for an excellent presentation.
You're welcome,
Number of
Maxine.
questions I'm hesitant to ask, but I think it ought to be asked right here, because it has always bothered me that every year we encounter hurricanes and other natural disasters and lose our buildings and our structures. And yet I think we, our Caribbean people, continue to build the same. The question on the table is, what can we do differently? How can we augment our resilience? Because we lose our buildings. So should we have different structures? Should we build them stronger? Because every year it's a problem. So I don't know if you can address that in this forum.
Well, on the one hand, and I think Marlene, as a psychologist, would be able to say something about that. One of the reasons people build back the way they had it before is their memory and their memories, and to regain something that they have lost. So they want to still have a piece of that. But one of the things that we have to grapple with is techniques. If it's a historic structure, or rules or preservation guidelines insist that we must, you know, keep the integrity of the structure. And so if it was built of wood and it was built with this and it looks like that, then it must come back to the same thing. And what we need now we need to now build in some resilient structures within those guidelines. So for argument's sake, even if you're going to build with wood, maybe the wood is cladding, and you have a different kind of interior, sorry. If the roof is supposed to be shingle, then, you know, you're gonna have to make some adaptation so that you are not withdrawing from the look of the building, but you also have signage and documentation that indicate why, you know, this building, this is what it looked like when it was built in 1701, and this is what happened to it in 2007 when we had hurricane whatever, and the rebuild is different because, and these are some of the adaptation structures. This has been done in other places where they've put in earthquake adaptation. It doesn't detract from the building itself, but it's an adaptation that is required to make sure the building doesn't fall down. So I think some of our structures, we build them and then we have category 3 and then they're fine, and then we have a category 5 and it's not fine. And so, you know, there needs to be, and the architects and civil engineers can talk more about that. There needs to be some structures that we put into the preservation guidelines and the rebuild guidelines that will allow some latitude, but within the context of the period that you are building. And I think that's where it comes in terms of building back and being more resilient and being able to record your post-disaster scenario. So what happened to the building, where got damaged, where broke down, you know, what happened to it, you know, in different parts or different places. And that way you can now start to put in the adaptations and document them and allow for the community to appreciate the reasons for these changes and why these changes are useful and why they make us resilient and will have this building for, you know, 30 more years, 40 more years, etc. I think that's what that's what we're going to have to do, because we're building them back, I agree, but our guidelines really dictate that we do exactly that, build them back.
Well, thank you so much, Shireen. What a great hour-and-a-half session. Absolutely fabulous. And thanks to everyone for the incredible, important discussion that we're having here, and really a call to action for us on the short term to really engage with these issues with politicians, with developers, with scientists, who are all connected in the heritage sector. So one last round of applause for Shireen and everyone in the discussion. All right, we'll now take a half an hour break. So we'll start at 12, let's say 12:15 Atlantic Standard Time. Thanks all. All right, thanks everyone for joining us for our last session of our two-day symposium event. Shireen, I like that you said it was a summit. I feel that way too. Lots of productive dialogue over the last 2 days, and really, as Philip said, really hoping to chart a path forward for capacity building in these critical areas across the Caribbean. For our final talk today, we're very lucky to have Dr. Carrie Hall, who has a PhD in tourism history from the University of the West Indies here in Barbados. And she has been critical in trying to understand both the history of tourism and charting a path forward for the industry here in Barbados and across the region. One of her most notable projects is a white paper that focuses on the development of tourism in the Caribbean and Barbados from 2012 to 2022. And really, tourism as a critical component of how we understand heritage within economic development and society in the 21st century is an important dialogue for us to have. And so we're incredibly happy to have her point of view and perspective on these challenges as we face them every day, as we drive around and see the cruise ships and the airplanes landing on many islands throughout the Caribbean. This is a challenge that we meet with every day. So Carrie, thank you so much for being with us today. Please share your screen and begin.
Hello, Brent. Thank you very much. I'd like to say hello to everyone who is currently participating in this session. And I'd like to thank you for inviting me to participate in what I deem to be a very important and timely conference to discuss one of my favorite topics in the world, that is the topic of cultural heritage. Even though I'm a tourism practitioner, I have always had a very deep and abiding love and appreciation for our culture, our history, our heritage, and has always been a proponent, particularly when I was working in government in the various positions, that I always tried to be a proponent for the development of cultural heritage tourism, not only just here, but also in the Caribbean. Now, what we're going to look at today The outline of my presentation would be pretty much, this is on the other side. I'd like to commend my 3 colleagues for their fantastic presentations over the last 2 days. And everybody speaking about the preservation and protection, etc. I am coming from the other end. I'm bowling from the other side of the wicket here in terms of saying when we preserve and protect, what is it that we're actually going to package and how we're going to present ourselves to the world, and can the Caribbean compete with the other destinations in the world that are currently utilizing cultural heritage as one of the major points or weapons of arsenal in their tourism development plans. So we'll be looking at cultural heritage tourism defined, the benefits and potential of cultural heritage, the challenges to cultural heritage tourism, and suggestions on the way forward. And a lot of these will come from my own personal experience of what I would have seen when I was in working at that level in the industry, and just a few suggestions of what I think we need to do based on the limitations that we have as destinations that we have discussed and ventilated very, very comprehensively over the last 2 days. So cultural heritage defined is traveling to experience the places, artifacts, and activities that authentically represent the stories and people of the past and present. Heritage tourism could include cultural, historic, and natural resources. Now, based on our conversation yesterday, I know there were some individuals who were speaking to the fact that when we speak about cultural heritage, we usually talk about the past, we usually talk about built heritage, which limits the potential and the scope of what cultural heritage truly is. And some suggested that we should speak to not only our past, but our present heritage as well. And also not just the built, but also all components of our heritage, which include cultural and natural resources. So this definition pretty much covers the whole gamut there with respect to what we were discussing yesterday and what we perceive to be one of the better definitions for what we see cultural heritage tourism to be. Now, cultural heritage tourism brings many benefits, social, environmental, and economic. And I'm here today to explore the possibilities of it being a serious economic driver in the region. So I'll jump straight into the part as to why it is and why we need to get on this cultural heritage tourism train as a region as expediently as possible. Now, one of the reasons why is the fact that it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Direct, indirect, and induced revenue of the industry reaches into the billions of dollars, and there are many destinations around the world who are really, China, England, the Middle East, most of the countries in Europe, etc. Even some in South America are really getting on this cultural heritage tourism train, and it's paying dividends. For us as a region, as we seek to recover from our pandemic, and we have to look for ways to reimagine our tourism industry and reconfigure our tourism business model, this would be the ideal industry, an industry that brings many benefits and a low impact, and it could also benefit the local residents as well as the environment, etc. This is the industry that I believe going forward is the industry that the region needs to lean in and take a closer look at. The fact that over 50% of today's visitors state that history and culture are strong influences on their choice of destination, that's also a very, very critical point. At the peak of tourism arrivals in 2019, before we were struck down by the COVID pandemic, it was a record 1.46 billion people that traveled that year. So if we're talking about over 50% of today's visitors, we are looking at over 700 million people who are out there seeking these types of experiences. This industry, or this sector or segment of the tourism industry, is a fast growing and high yielding sector. It's one of the fastest growing sectors right now, and it's the one that is making some of the most money and contributing to the economies of many, many countries around the world. Another reason is the fact that the traveler has changed. Tourism has pivoted, the travel has also changed. So we, as Caribbean destinations, also need to make that pivot in order to, if we seek to remain relevant within the scope of the global tourism industry, we need to make sure that we are selling what our consumers want to buy, but I'm always been a proponent of not just selling our souls, but developing these types of sectors or niche areas that are not only beneficial to the persons who are seeking it out, but also beneficial to our countries as well, and could only bring benefits to the local residents, and to ensure there is not a debilitating impact upon our respective environments. So the traveler of today, and this has been a movement that's been happening now for quite some time, where they're seeking unique, memorable experiences. They're seeking learning, authenticity, enrichment. Today's traveler wants immersion. They want to get into the DNA of a destination, and they want memorable, off the beaten path, once in a lifetime experiences. Now, these heritage visitors also earn more. They spend more, up to 38% more, and they stay longer, up to 22% longer than traditional tourists. And the beauty about these heritage travelers, they seem to be more environmentally and socially conscious. They want to give back. They want to ensure that their money is infused into the local economy and it benefits the local residents. They support local businesses, local artisans, arts and crafts. And these are the types of visitors, to be very honest, that the Caribbean should be actively and strategically targeting, because they bring more than just economic or financial benefits. They bring benefits to the entire country, based on the fact that these are visitors who respect our traditions, our customs. They want to, immerse themselves in our communities. And this really is the best type of traveler that I perceive over the landscape of tourism that is traveling right now. And we need to be able to create an industry where we are still relevant and we are offering an experience that people are seeking. So along with that, cultural heritage is also a modern day marketing tool. There are a lot of countries and cities around the world that are fusing cultural heritage and tourism at a policy level. So this is something that's been happening now. I wrote the white paper for tourism back in 2009. And from back then I was seeing this shift, this paradigm shift in this direction, where a lot of countries around the world are actually fusing tourism and culture. Their ministry, the Ministry of Tourism and Culture, tourism and heritage, tourism and antiquities. That's what Britain did. And this has signaled to the world that this is an area of priority for these countries going forward. And this is where they'll be putting, I believe, their funding and their attention in this, because they obviously know it reaps economic benefits and other benefits for their economies. And they're also using this as a marketing tool, where they're leading with their heritage in their marketing images. And that is another change that I've seen happening of recent times. And this is something that we in the region need to be sitting up and taking a little bit of notice of, because the world has shifted and we need to understand this, and we need to also make the requisite shift as well, particularly in an area that can bring so many benefits to the Caribbean. Now, this next slide is a little bit weird, because I am bringing some information that's 10 years old, but stay with me. I'm going somewhere with this. In 2012, the CTO, the Caribbean Tourism Organization, did a survey because they realized that cruise travel to the region was not as, the travel in winter was doing very well, but the numbers in summer were not as prolific as they were in winter. So they wanted to do a survey to see why and what they could do to entice more people to want to travel during the summer. Now, when I started to curate the information coming out of the research that I would have conducted, I saw some amazing things came out of it. And I was very excited, because it's one thing when you do research and see that these are the trends, but when research meets reality, that makes things very interesting. So cultural heritage and culinary activities, surprisingly enough, were rated as being more important onshore motivators to entice the travelers to visit during summer. And this was done by both cruisers and people who were non-cruisers. They were saying, if you want us to come to the Caribbean during the summer, we're looking for cultural heritage and culinary activities or experiences. Now, some of the comments that came along in this survey didn't shock me, but they were very, very instructive. And there were quite a few of them, but I pulled out about 6 to come to you to make the point I'm trying to make here. The first comment says, the Caribbean needs more than just sunshine to promote its brand. The other comment says, there's not enough marketing and exposure of the cultural aspects of the region. Rather, a generic sand, sea, and sun offering is primarily promoted. Another one said, the Caribbean's main selling point has traditionally been the weather and its natural assets, which becomes a moot point when it is summertime in temperate countries. One more said, the region needs to push its heritage, adventure, romance, and cultural aspects more aggressively. Now, the last two, I think those were the two that cut the deepest for me as a very proud and passionate Caribbean woman. When one said, been there, done that, and the other one said, seen one, seen them all. Now, that jumped me and it hurt me a little bit, because I then realized that what these travelers and potential visitors were saying, you got to give me more than just a beach. I want more experiences. I want to experience the flavor of the region. And right now, the Caribbean, based on what they're saying, is viewed as a homogeneous destination with a singular identity, anchored or rooted deeply in a sand, sea, and sun proposition. That's what those comments told me. And we know that's not true. We know out of all of our islands, each island has its own identity, its own distinct history, heritage, traditions, culture. But somehow we have failed to demonstrate this and showcase this to the world. We have not showcased our region in its entirety. We have not told the whole story in a way that would inspire travelers to want to come to see what we have to offer other than our natural assets. And it was sad because they were the ones who were asking, please, can you do more culture? Could you do more heritage? We want to see more food. I've been in meetings when cruise executives have asked the region, you know, you're a little bit samey. Is there any way that you can showcase your rich culture, your story, your food, your people, your music? You know, can people tell the difference between Barbados and Guadeloupe, or St. Lucia and Dominica, or Jamaica, or Cuba? And I realized that there was work to be done, and I was hoping that this information was not going to fall on deaf ears, and we were going to take it and actually do something about it. So I asked myself the $1 million question based on the previous comments. Can the Caribbean truly deliver a cultural heritage product that can compete with the best of the best globally on the world stage? Or have we gone too far down the sand, sea, and sun rabbit hole to pull ourselves back? And I went and I started to list. I created this blank canvas, and I just started to list down what my region has in the, I call it the cultural heritage footprint of the Caribbean. Our built heritage, our natural heritage, our cultural heritage. And I reassured myself, no, we do have what it takes. The Caribbean is a story as yet untold. It is a beautiful tapestry that has been weaved over the centuries into one rich, beautiful, and compelling story. We have vibrancy and culture and unsurpassed beauty, talented people. The region is different from any other region in the world. The only issue is we don't seem to value what we have enough to showcase ourselves with pride to the world, to protect and preserve our heritage, our natural and built heritage, and definitely to showcase all the different types of our cultural heritage, etc. I didn't realize that we had a bit of a problem that needed to be rectified. Now, so far in this presentation, we've established 3 or 4 or 5 important facts. We've established the fact that cultural heritage is beneficial and can be very, very beneficial to the region. We have established that it is a high yielding sector that could bring in, could be an economic driver for our region. It is fast growing, it's high yielding. We've established the fact that there's a high demand for it globally, that millions and millions of travelers are seeking these types of experiences. We have established that the travel trade, and our visitors have been asking us for many years, please show us the other side of the Caribbean, show us your heritage, your culture, you know, let us know what it is that we need to see when we come to these islands, besides your beautiful beaches. And we have also established that, yes, we can compete based on the list I just presented to you. And we do have something to offer the world that is of worth and of value. So my question is, what's stopping us? What's keeping us back? Why have we not taken a seat at the cultural heritage table? And we need to explore the root causes of these issues, which have been preventing us from completely capitalizing on this very lucrative niche area of the tourism industry. So what I know that there's several issues, and we spoke to them yesterday, so I decided I wasn't speaking to them today. I was going to go straight in and speak to it from a touristic perspective. But we know with respect to the product itself, the cultural heritage product, that we need now to open up to the world, to tourism, and how we need to package and promote it to the world, that there is a lack of awareness or a lack of desire. We have problems with policy and legislation, the political will. We don't have the resources to fund on a consistent basis. And based on the last presentation, there are threats of climate change. So there are many challenges to the heritage in the island, but I'll go straight in to just discuss with you what the challenges have been from a touristic perspective. And one of the biggest issues, and it falls directly in line with what I discussed just now coming out of that survey, where there's been a traditional overemphasis on marketing and the promotion of science and tourism. Now, this has happened historically, because from the time we first started developing tourism, it has been science and tourism. From the time we started developing tourism in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when in several of the bigger islands like Barbados, Bermuda, Bahamas, Jamaica, Cuba, there was a propensity to invite people down or to promote our islands. And you will see that in early brochures. They come in the winter season. And I think that model stuck. We never quite moved off from there. And we've done extremely well because we're now the #1 warm weather destination in the world. So we've done a really great job, and we are known for our natural assets, and that's commendable. But I think we've done too great a job, because what we have done is we have pretty much pigeonholed ourselves or the region into a place to go when it's cold up north and warm down south, just like what one of those comments said. And we have hamstrung ourselves into being seen through a singular lens of the Caribbean is nothing more really than a beach and a waving palm tree, and you go there for water sports and beautiful beaches and beautiful weather. And it is true, but we need now to move from there. And I think people get nervous when we start talking about cultural heritage or other niche areas like health and wellness or culinary tourism or community tourism. We're not trying to take the place of Science and Sun, because that is one of our biggest strengths. We're saying we're not competing with Science and Sun. We're saying we are going to complement Science and Sun by opening up the space to offer the world everything that the Caribbean is. Because I think we've been shortchanging ourselves for a very, very long time. We've shortchanged ourselves, we shortchanged our people, our visitors, our economy. And I think it's time for us to really get with the program and branch out and develop the areas that puts the Caribbean on the world map, so to speak. So other challenges, we fail to diversify and differentiate, as I would have said. We have focused primarily on one. There are several islands. I mean, we've come away because there are islands who've started to diversify and started to develop. But I'm speaking generally in terms of the issues in the region, acknowledging the fact that there have been some positive changes. There's been a lack of focus on investment and product development. We have pretty much focused on marketing, and any funds we have, scarce funds in terms of marketing in the region, have been invested in marketing to the detriment of product development, which is creating new things, enhancing, creating new experiences, upgrading the product and the things to do on the island. We have just been telling people to come, but I don't think we have been really focusing on when they get here, what are they going to do? So this has resulted in a lack of market-ready packaged products and minimal marketing of heritage. And this focus on Science and Sun has resulted in a very seasonal industry, 6-7 months out of the year, as opposed to a year-round sector, because people come when it's cold up north and warm down south. So we have not realized the full economic benefits of what tourism should and can bring. Another area, another issue has been heritage ambivalence by the tourism industry and the government, where we paid lip service to heritage development with little or no implementation. I think we mean well when we say it, but in terms of sticking the landing, we just experience some challenges where we just don't follow through, or we start and we stop. We don't see it through to its logical conclusion. As Alexander Cummins said yesterday, there's a lack of knowledge about the economic impact of heritage tourism, which is true, because if we knew about the economic impact and the value of heritage tourism, maybe we will pay more attention to it and take it a little bit more seriously. But the dearth of knowledge about our history, our heritage in general, far less the economic impact it could bring, that also contributes to a non-movement in this area. The lack of formal linkages between culture and tourism. As I said, a lot of countries are fusing the two. In Barbados, we have worked along with culture on several different projects. So sometimes it can work, but we need to have, if the ministries are fused, there are greater synergies and you will actually get something done. You could come up with a comprehensive plan for the sector fused as one, as opposed to right hand not knowing what left hand is doing, and there are a lot of redundancies, and so that has always been an issue. The lack of commitment, knowledge, or confidence by tourism officials. I do believe that because we don't have the knowledge that we need, and I believe in some cases it seems that we don't have the confidence that what we have and who we are is good enough to put this out there to the world, there's also a corresponding lack of commitment to actually do it. And that has been an issue. Another area is that the tourism agencies, especially the marketing agencies, the executing arms of the ministries, are typically dominated by accommodation providers. Now, in the Caribbean, we look at hotels as a major, sometimes we look at hotels as being tourism itself. Interchangeably, we use the two. And hoteliers obviously they're business people, they want to fill their hotel rooms. And I understand that. So when that happens, airlift and finding planes to come in to bring people to fill the hotel rooms, etc. So sometimes we take the money and we invest it in areas of traditional promotional areas, as opposed to seeking to develop new niche areas such as cultural heritage tourism, for example. So sometimes we find that maybe it is not a priority for people who are in the decision-making seat. And sometimes we find that that's what happened. The UE, OAS, the Heritage Studies graduates, the OAS and UE collaborated to start this program because they saw cultural heritage as an integral part to economic development in the region. And these students have been trained in skills of preservation and conservation, management and planning of cultural heritage, but somehow I don't believe that they're absorbed in the system. I don't know if they go into the cultural aspects or the cultural ministries, but I know for sure in the tourism, where we need their skills and their knowledge to help us to build out a cultural heritage tourism sector, that is not necessarily the case. So those are some of the challenges, and there are just a few of them, but there's some critical ones that have prevented the system from going forward. And I'll now like just to move on to some of the solutions to these challenges. Hopefully that it could get us to where we need to be as being able to provide a viable cultural tourism offering to the world. And one of the areas that I think we need to do, heritage tourism must be an integral part of a strategic, actionable tourism development plan. I think we have to decide we are doing this, we're going in this direction, and we're coming up with a plan that involves all the critical areas for cultural heritage that is needed to succeed in such an endeavor as this. And I've underlined actionable because I realize there's an issue with implementation. So not only are we doing this, we have to ensure that we see it through to its logical conclusion and ensure implementation. So we have to put the policy framework, the legislation, the right funding in place. So we look at what is wrong or the gaps in the system and close those gaps. We develop effective partnerships between the public, the private sector, academia. We need the historians around the table, the National Trust, everybody saying, the architects, etc. And also we need to involve civil society, because I think the average Caribbean person needs to have a say in the role they want to see tourism play for them. So if we're coming up with this, let's sit down and just determine as a group, that is the only way we're going to achieve buy-in and it will actually succeed. Let's benchmark some regional or global best practices, because if implementation is a problem, many times I see us start to do something, but I think we don't stick the landing because maybe we don't know how to actually do it. So benchmarking or copying, call it copying, certain models that are in line or similar to what we're trying to do, I believe that's where we can actually fulfill our potential of actually coming up with some tangible cultural tourism experiences or assets. We also need to develop a comprehensive diversification and differentiation strategy. This is very important as we diversify out from tourism. We must differentiate ourselves with respect to our cultural assets. So once again, I think Dr. Williamson spoke about the inventory. We need to make an inventory of key iconic heritage tourism assets and stories. And I think in Barbados, the OAS and the Ministry of Culture had collaborated to start a program such as this, which I deem to be very invaluable. And this is something that we need to do to really find those assets that have the greatest potential to set the region apart and then to prioritize their development. We need to interpret and promote our heritage experiences, attractions, and stories in a way that is meaningful and accessible. And I do think that we just can't sit or 2 or 3 people in a room. Once again, complete and total involvement and collaboration. We need those stories to be agreed upon by different sources, may it be historians, stakeholders, may it be communities around the particular island to ensure accuracy and heritage interpretation. So once again, we could achieve that all necessary and all important buy-in. Now, once we know what the stories are, we need to mandate heritage certification so that everybody is saying the same thing, the same story, the same accuracy, the same interpretation. There are too many times where I've gone on different tours and I've heard some things that I knew were not true. And the visitor today, they are coming to us with their receipts. They've already done their research. They already know what it is before they even ask us. So they will know if we're bluffing and if our people don't know the reality. And you know, so we need to make sure our tour guides and frontline workers and tourism ambassadors are up to a certain level of professionalism. By doing that, we need to also integrate the unique aspects of our cultural heritage into a differentiated branding and marketing strategy, right? To tell the story of the region so that it distinguishes us from our competitors. So once we create the inventory and we come up with the iconic tourism assets that are unique only to our region, that is the very basis that we would use then to go to the world and completely reinvent and reimagine our tourism product as we take this pivot and we go and show the world our cultural and heritage product. Something I was always thinking about, we have quite a few UNESCO World Heritage sites. I think in the Caribbean alone, there are 9 in Cuba and 10 in different islands. If we include Bermuda, Belize, and Suriname, we have 24 in all. And I believe that we could probably promote and lead with our UNESCO World Heritage sites, cluster them, and use them as the centerpiece of our region's heritage tourism offering as we introduce the world to what a powerhouse the Caribbean is with respect to our UNESCO heritage sites, and then let all of the other heritage sites come in under them as we seek to, the heritage sites would draw the attention, and then we'll be able to then promote the other components of our heritage assets behind this. Now, in terms of the heritage tourism infrastructure, we have to improve here. I think we need to establish some visitor information and interpretation centers around our islands. Some people say that is costly. It doesn't have to be bricks and mortar. It could be green heart. It could be a little kiosk made of bamboo. But I think we need to take ownership. Too often we leave our visitors to their own devices. They just drive around the country aimlessly. There's no signage. There's nobody to help, to point, to advise. And a lot of fantastic, phenomenal cultural heritage opportunities are lost. So if you could just set up these little sites where people would, provide essential services such as theme tours or promotional materials, site-specific information, train tour guides, etc. I think that would go a long way of us taking ownership of our cultural heritage product and ensuring that the visitor, we're able to enhance the visitor experience. We also need to erect and maintain directional and on-site interpretative signage. This is a major issue to me and a real bugbear. There's nothing I hate to see is bad signage, directional, or to go on site and the sign is there, but the sign is either dropping to pieces, the words are faded, it's dirty, it's mossy, it's dusty. It does not look professional and it doesn't speak very well for us as a destination. So we need to erect proper directional on-site interpretive signage program all across the country, because it's not just for the tourists, it's also to educate our locals as well of the stories, historic gems, little known historic gems and stories. This is one way we're going to educate our people as well as the visitors. So it's a win-win type of situation. We also need to utilize user-friendly technology to modernize our heritage assets. Sometimes people look at these buildings as old and dreary and boring. And we are appealing to a Gen Z and a millennial generation who live on their phones and live through technology. So things such as virtual reality, augmented reality, interactive museums. I know all of this costs money, but as we seek to really quadruple down on developing a cultural tourism product for the region, we can't do so unless we implement some form of technology to modernize the experience. I was so happy to hear us talk about local craftspersons and the training of specialized skills, because that's very important. We have certain skills like shipbuilding and making pottery from clay and making furniture from mahogany and these different areas that are dying a natural death. So I'm very glad to hear we're going to preserve them for future generations to ensure that that very critical component of our Caribbean story does not die. I heard once again, Ms. Alexandra come and say yesterday that we need to probably do more research to build a justification for heritage development, and that is true. People may not know this worth. I don't think we do research. We don't do surveys or studies, and maybe we need to do one to build a justification so it's not so hard to get this to people to understand that this is an area that we need to do and to do well and get off the ground. And most importantly, we need to develop and promote all aspects of our heritage, not just our colonial heritage, and we spoke about this at length yesterday. All aspects, past heritage, present heritage. For a region that most of the people are of African descent, we need to further develop that component. Barbados is about to do it, and I'm so blissful. We have a slave museum, I think, in Guadeloupe, a memorial in Martinique. We have about 6 monuments in a couple islands, but this is an area, and maybe if we do this and our people are able to connect with something where they see themselves reflected in the mirror, as opposed to a colonial building where some may feel a disconnect. I think if we promote all Amerindian background, we will probably start to get a change in mindsets and attitudes towards heritage preservation. And the ultimate goal, of course, is to develop a year-round tourism industry. And cultural heritage could do it. San Sea and Sun can't. San Sea and Sun is a 6 to 7 month industry. Heritage tourism will enable us to come up with those fantastic year-round experiences. It will enhance the brand. It will increase employment on a year-round basis. It will increase tourism revenues, tax revenues. It will create opportunities for job creation and wealth creation and poverty alleviation, which is very, very important, especially coming out of a COVID environment. We need to find something that will get us up on our feet, something we could do really well, something we could compete with the best of the best in the world. And cultural heritage is that, where we will attract a new audience to the region and increase market share of this and showcase ourselves to the world with pride. So I'm over my time, Brent? Brent? Hello?
Oh, you're fine. Keep going.
Okay, I'm just going shortly. This is just another minute or two. Differentiate or die. This is a comment that I found in, I was looking at some cultural heritage development projects, and this was one in Australia. When I went back to get the source, I could not find it, so I apologize. But what this gentleman has said just resonated with everything that I had discussed prior to this. When it says, in terms of cultural heritage tourism development, focus on what your destination has that is truly unique and different. Focus on the qualities that separate your location from anywhere else in the world. That's your hook. That's your angle. That is what visitors are looking for. As we become more humongous, and he means as a tourism industry worldwide, people are looking for those special one-of-a-kind places. And that is exactly what I attempted to do when I was working in the government, where I tried to look, so Henry Fraser is one of my good friends, and he's been an inspiration to me in making me more aware of our heritage, our built heritage, its value. And I remember when I was writing the white paper for tourism development, and I wanted to seek to differentiate the Barbados product from the rest of the world, and I wanted to do that using our rich heritage. I remember going and saying, is there anything unique that we have here that we can't find anywhere else that we could lead with in terms of our marketing, our marketing proposition? And I was given a list, and I'll share it with you now. I'll go through this extremely quickly. The UNESCO World Heritage Site, these are one and onlys in Barbados. Our UNESCO World Heritage Site, historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Our chattel houses, they are in indigenous architecture to Barbados. Our Jewish synagogue, which is the oldest consecrated synagogue in the Western Hemisphere. Our Newton enslaved burial ground, which is the only, I think is the largest and the only communal slave burial ground within a plantation setting in the Western Hemisphere. We have Codrington College, the oldest Anglican Episcopal Theological Seminary in the Western Hemisphere. We have 2 out of the 3 remaining Jacobean style mansions in the Western Hemisphere, St. Nicholas Abbey and Vauxhall. The 3rd is in Virginia in America. George Washington House. This house right here is the only place outside of the continental USA which George Washington, the first president of the USA, visited. And he stayed right here with his brother Lawrence in 1751 when he was 19 years old. And you could go in his bedroom and see where George slept. Blackwell Screw Dock, we have the last remaining screw dock of its kind in the world. The Barbados Carolinas connection. Barbados was the first and only colony to have ever founded another colony. Barbados founded Carolinas. And that house right there, Collington House, is where the expedition that left from Speightstown to the Carolinas, that is where the expedition was planned, and that house is still standing. Of course, we're the birthplace of rum. Morgan Lewis Windmill is the largest and only complete sugar windmill surviving in the Caribbean. It's a gorgeous structure. We also have the rarest collection of 17th century English iron cannons in the world. We found at St. Anne's Fort, and we have the Harry Bailey Observatory, the only observatory in the Eastern Caribbean. So I decided, let's pull out, let's look at our product, look at what we have, look at what is unique about what we have, where people would want to come and see it because it is the rarest, the last, the first, the only. And we actually created this little brochure called Unique to Barbados, which kind of highlighted everything and more of what I just spoke about. So this is what I say when I mean we need to cluster. We need to make a list of the extremely important and unique one-of-a-kind things, and there's several of them in this region. I'm usually blown away when I really read about my region and see how there's so much of, the largest this, the only that. And this is what we could do as a form of our heritage, the market-ready ones, because there's still a lot of our heritage that is laying, decaying, derelict all around our lands in this region, and it's really a crying shame. But the ones that are market-ready, as we seek to find a way to salvage the rest, we could find a way to market them and to showcase them and show the world, you need to come here. We have something phenomenal to offer, and it is not sand, sea, and sun. So in conclusion, producing quality and exceeding visitor expectations are usually the main areas of focus of tourism entities. However, the spark that actually transforms a destination into something remarkable is its ability to express pride in itself and exhibit great passion about celebrating its local distinctiveness through its heritage, culture, food, landscapes, and people. So this statement encapsulates tourism as the present, tourism of the future. It shows what the traveler is looking for, and it shows what we need to do to value who we are and what we have, and to know what we have and who we are is good enough to share with the world. And hopefully our region, we're at a stage now where we get that, and we're at a point where we understand we are more than a beach, and we need to develop these other areas, and we need to do it. It's easier said than done, but where there's a will, there's a way. And I know we could do this, and I think we have to do this. This is our gift to the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you very much, and I take any of your comments and questions at this time.
Thanks so much, Carrie. The chat was going rapidly while you were talking, so I think that there's lots to discuss.
I'm afraid though, it's not a good or bad thing.
seeing the chat bar pop up and whatnot. So let's go ahead and take questions from the room if there are any first. No, not right now. Maxine, if you'll start us off.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Carey, for your presentations. All these professors who always present us wonderful presentations. Now you ended with beach, and so I'll start with beach. I recall a few years back, I had some friends from Turks and Caicos here in St. Vincent. And I took them to the beach, and they were in awe. And in his hand, he had the sand, the black sand, or black volcanic sand. And I wanted to know what was so amazing about it. And he looked at me and he said, I have never seen black sand. Now, Ollie made a quote from someone who we can't recall the source, and it stated something like, I'm paraphrasing, show what's unique about your destination. And I noticed some Caribbean islands that they're now importing white sand to cover some of the black sand. Can you speak to our people? What can you say to us so that we can stop this? Because what you said was right. Showcase what's uniquely yours. Why are we taking white sand from Guyana, where we know friends Guyana in the room, or Barbados, let's use the professor's country, and bringing in sand to import, and people come to see our black sand. So can you talk to people? I don't know what you can say as to encourage us. It's depressing.
Yes, and I would like to tell you, I went to a conference in St. Vincent, a sustainable tourism conference about 3 years ago. And I'm from next door in Barbados. I could not get enough of your black sand. I was taught, you would think that I just came from next door. You would think I came from Mars. I was blown away by the black sand. And I just rubbed it all over my body because I know it has medicinal properties to it. And what you just said, that is, I do not know why we seem to be behind the 8 ball in understanding how the world has changed, and in terms of consumer behavior, how the consumer has changed as well, and what they're looking for. They don't want something that they could find anywhere else. They're looking for one of a kind, unique, memorable. So yes, when they saw your beaches, even though there is a place for beaches, people do want to come and relax on a beach, and I completely understand that. And that type of that component of our product is there. But your black beach, you'll be surprised of how many people who've been there, done that. Remember in the survey, what one of the people said, been there, done that. Who would love to come on your black beach just because it is different, it's unique, because every other beach is white. And we need to, and I hope that St. Vincent is promoting that fact. And because sometimes I think we get a little bit complacent and we tend to take our region, our beautiful region, for granted, and our story for granted. And we sometimes think that nobody is interested, because we are not, interested in it. Nobody else would. But our stories are of extreme interest to the region, especially the stories that the little known stories. And because we have pushed Sand, Sea, and Sand for so many years, we could reinvent our tourism product overnight by just clustering these assets that already exist, but that are little known because nobody knows about them. We've never spoken about them. In many cases, our own local residents don't know about them. So what I'm saying is some things don't cost money. Some things are things that just laying there. I keep saying they're not even low-hanging fruit. This fruit has dropped on the ground, but it's still, there's still use for it. We may not be able to make juice, but we can still make jam. So it's never too late for us in this region, but we have to catch up. We're still too far behind the 8 ball. We have to love ourselves. We have to love our Caribbeanness. It starts there with self-love, because once we love, we will then showcase to the world with pride. And we also first have to even know these places and these things exist. So we have work to do, but once we understand that and we get started, nothing is insurmountable. We can make this happen in the shortest time period once we put our minds to it and decide this is what is going to happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's take a question from the chat. Brent asks, what are some of the ways that other dimensions of tourism and hospitality can be more integrated with, particularly with cruise ship passengers, to optimize engagement, given the numbers in the region are rapidly growing and already exceed land stay visitors in many cases?
Yes, we have to take a serious look at our cruise passengers, because when you look at the cruise passengers' economic contribution compared to a long stay passenger, it is pretty negligible. So we have not found a way to extract those economic benefits from our cruise passengers. The cruise passengers come here, And many times they have certain providers that take them to a beach. We have not done a very good job, even though I told you, based on that survey, even though they said, please give us more cultural activities, more heritage, more culinary activities, I do not think that we have delivered on that. And if you go to cruise, I've been to several cruise conferences, and they usually make these presentations which speak to different trends with the consumer. And all the trends were pointed in that direction. They're looking for experiential activities. They're more sight doers now than sightseers. They just don't want to go on the typical round the way island tour or being trucked off to the nearest beach. There's some who do want that, but there's some, because we are not offering them what they want. It is there, but there's a case where never the twain seems to be meeting, where we have what they want, but somehow, as I said, we're not sticking the landing. So in order to bolster the economic contributions of the cruise passengers, we need to be able to set up a system where we are able to deliver on their expectations. We're able to come up with those experiences on the ground. And in many cases, we keep going with the usual suspects, those more experiential type of activities. We haven't really developed that product in a way that is market ready. Some people have succeeded in doing it. And there will be some then that even though you're doing it, no one knows you're doing it. So we just have to, like I said, we really have to sit down and determine as a tourism industry what it is we're actually doing, what is the plan, what are the types of experiences we want to deliver and to who, because we're dealing with different generational segments, the boomers, the Gen X, millennials, Gen Zs, and we need to find a way to develop. And I told you we're a little weak on product development on the ground, to develop these products and then find a way to ensure that the passengers or the individuals know that they exist and find a way to ensure that they can find them. I think that is an area we are kind of weak in and we need to improve. Once we've improved and we're able to deliver on these experiences, which we can deliver, I think that the sky will be the limit then.
I think that Karen had her hand up. I don't know if she still has a question, if she wants to unmute and ask.
My question had just been answered, actually, because I was actually going to ask Dr. Hall myself about cruise ships. A couple of years ago, I was actually working or volunteering with the National Trust out in Fiji. And so much of what I've heard yesterday and today resonates, even though Fiji is around the other side of the world. There's just so many similarities. And a statistic I heard whilst I was there, that out of the cruise ships that in pre-COVID times came into Suva, 30% of the passengers didn't get off the ship because there was nothing to see or they were scared. And to an organisation like, for example, the National Trust for Fiji, even a minibus of a dozen tourists to one of their sites would make such a difference. So I'm not going to ask my question because Dr. Hall has really answered it and covered it, but it's a problem around the world. I mean, the cruise industry is taking off again. In fact, I wish I was with you now. I was in Barbados 3 weeks ago and standing in the ground of St. Nicholas Abbey, I think almost 3 weeks today. So I wish I had been able to stay 3 weeks longer, but I was on a very small ship, just 100 passengers on a tall ship for a week. And the same problem I observed, passengers saying, we're not getting off, there's nothing really to see or do, there's only one little beach bar and some nesting birds. So it could be great if we could crack into that, but on the other hand, could it become a curse as cruise ships get bigger and bigger, 3,500 passengers? How can that be managed without adverse impacts on the environment and some of the heritage?
Yes, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and that's where sustainable and responsible development comes in. And that's where we really need to ensure that that is the route we are taking. Because when you look around the world, in major cities around the world, like Barcelona, Amsterdam, Venice, you find Key West, you find the local residents are pretty much taking their streets back. They're tired of this over-tourism. They're tired of these cruise ships pulling up and thousands of people pouring out on their streets, the congestion, the noise, the litter, you know, they have just said this, enough is enough. It is now having a debilitating impact on my life, my livelihood. And we need to find that balance where we are able to control these numbers to ensure that tourism is an industry that is more destructive than it is positive. So you're absolutely correct. It's not just a matter of just more and more and more, pouring more people into our nations, especially if they're not spending any money, especially if they're just going to lie down on the beach. They're putting pressure on our scarce resources, may that be our shorelines or solid waste or water resources or whatever. And we have to get to the point where we start to develop an industry that we are taking a more sustainable type approach, and we're taking a more balanced approach to make sure that, yes, numbers, that's why I mentioned that in terms of our cultural heritage travelers, that they earn more and they spend more. So you don't have to have thousands and thousands of mass tourists coming in, earning a negligible amount of money. You could actually have less people coming in who are not going to put the pressure on our very fragile islands, but they spend more, and the spend on the revenue is still up where it's supposed to be, but we have a different type of traveler. So yes, I agree what you said. We don't want that to happen where those mega ships come in, and already we have destinations around the world. Key West, the residents of Key West went out and signed a petition and got a law passed where only small green ships could come, only X amount of people, I think no more than 1,500 or something at a time on shore. And they realized they were losing their city, environmental degradation, you know, congestion, the cost of living was going up, all these little stupid, like, you know, souvenir shops were replacing real artisanal types of arts and craft, and, you know, people with true talent. And they took a stance. And I think in Juneau, Alaska, they took a stance. So we don't want it to get to where the locals actually have to rise up. I hope in the Caribbean, our authorities, yes, want the cruise ship to come, they want the money, but we don't sell our soul for a few pieces of silver. That there is a balance there, and in that balance, the local residents come out on top always.
Thanks so much. Andrea, would you like to ask your question from the chat?
Okay. Well, I was asking, are you hearing me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. I was saying it would be good to know what our tourism partners are doing about improving regional travel, because this is one of the most, I don't know how to describe traveling in this region, as well as expensive going between islands. So if we're really serious about promoting connections between countries and developing heritage tours, for example, or routes between islands, we certainly need to work on this component, which I think is a restriction right now. Thank you.
Yes, this has been a bugbear for the region. I just don't understand how we have never been able to get this issue solved, because it has been to the detriment of regional travel and developing these aspects. Because if we're talking cultural, for example, we could cluster and do some multi-destination marketing and different islands, like what I just said in terms of the UNESCO World Heritage sites. If we cluster them and promote them, suppose somebody wants to come and go and see 3 or 4 and they want an island hop, because the only way you could see more than one is if you go to Cuba and do all 9. But that has been a major issue, and it has really put us at a serious disadvantage in terms of enhancing our regional tourism, even from the perspective of us as Caribbean people who would love to know, I would spend $150, $200 and go next door to Grenada for the weekend. That's what it used to be back about 30 years ago. And, you know, you would go there for the weekend because it was just $100, but now it's like $800. It's cheaper to go to Miami, a couple of thousand or so miles away, than it is to go next door 100 miles. And for visitors who probably want to come and island hop, where more than one destination benefits, and they're able to see the islands and experience the culture of different islands, since they think we are one homogeneous grouping or identity, that it is stymied, because the cost of travel is so prohibitive that we're losing so much opportunity there, that I'm saying when we charge these exorbitant prices and the plane is half full, would it make sense to cut it in half or a quarter and fill the plane and just stimulate travel on the ground? And that travel would then stimulate economic activity. It is just would be a win-win multiplier effect situation. But I really do not know how we have not been able to do that. And I hope coming out of COVID, I don't know if we were in the injury room for the last 2 years, when we burst back out on the global stage once COVID, pass or abates, if we're going to see an improvement in that area. I really hope so, because that will go a long way towards promoting and advancing regional tourism.
Miguel, you have a question.
Hi, yes, Dr. Hall, Miguel Pena here. Fantastic presentation, and congratulations on that. I just wanted to quickly make a couple of comments with regards to UNESCO. As you know, we have a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We got it back in 2011, and we're working on another one, the story of sugar and rum. And in the planning for the story of sugar and rum, it is recognized by the state party that tourism needs to play a more important role, because I think there is a recognition that in the planning for the historic Bridgetown and its garrison, there was not a great deal of engagement with Barbadians, first of all, far less tourists. And I just wondered if you could speak to that, the divide. I know you've spoken about it, but there seems to be this terrible chasm that exists right here in Barbados and indeed across the region, where a lot of Barbadians and a lot of Caribbean people believe that heritage sites are for the foreign and they have nothing to do with them. And how can we work at breaking that down? That's point number one. Point number two, with regards to synergies, as you know, our Ministry of Tourism, many years, well, not that long ago, but a few years ago, used to have a product and a marketing wing, and that has now been collapsed into one. And I'm wondering if we need to have a Ministry of Tourism and Heritage, almost a synergy of tourism and the Ministries of Culture. I was wondering if you could opine, give an opinion on that, if you will. Thank you.
You're welcome, Miguel. Miguel wants to get me in a little bit of trouble, but that's okay. The first question, Miguel, you're absolutely correct. And this is one of the saddest things I have about when we developed our UNESCO World Heritage Site. And I don't think Barbados is probably the only place this has happened. Maybe it is, I'm not sure. But our site is now, it was 2011, is now 11 years old that we've had it. And one of the biggest gaps in the designation of that site is that the Barbadian people were not involved, educated. And I know probably I've seen the documentation and how tedious the process is to actually get a designation. So maybe they were lost in the translation. But because that did not happen, there is such a massive disconnect. I mean, when you look at Bridgetown and the significance of Bridgetown as a commercial, cosmopolitan trading entrepot back in the 17th and 18th century, and that is why I don't think Barbadians know why we got it, what it is. I don't think there's any value or any care or due attention to the site, and I think it comes from just lack of knowledge. Because when there's lack of knowledge, there's lack of pride. So even when we are driving through Bridgetown, I don't think it's foremost in anybody's mind, this is a city of extreme universal value. And this is something we must cherish and feel a part of. So I don't think they felt a part. Maybe the story of it, they didn't feel a part of, or maybe because they were not educated as much as they should have been on the story. I always a proponent of it's never too late. I know that we have a IADB loan that we are now trying to generate and jumpstart the whole site again. And there's certain areas we're going to be enhancing and involving local people, etc. And even though we may have not gotten it 100% right in the beginning, we could still pull it back. And I think there's still opportunities for that, but we have to make this a priority area. and use every available source, maybe social media, maybe radio, television, whatever, teaching in schools, to reach our people and educate them on the critical importance of this. I think we probably need a refresher course. When it became the designated site, maybe there was a lot of hoopla around it, but I think we now need to take a refresher course and get people involved. And a large part of that involvement is going to come with education. So I agree with what you're saying, Miguel, but I still believe that this site is of extreme value. And yes, we need to educate and bring the Barbadian people along. And I believe they will lock in, because I think right now there's awakening of a social consciousness, and I see more and more Barbadians becoming very involved and locked into history and stories of heritage. A lot of things that are being put on by the National Cultural Foundation, a lot of things that are being put on by even the the Barbados Museum. And you're getting a lot of crowds coming out. So I do believe that they're interested and they're thirsty for the information. We just need to give it to them. And that could be very easily done. And I'm sure it will be done. So that is the answer to the first question. The second one, in terms of if we should have a Ministry of Tourism and Heritage. Well, you shouldn't ask me that, because I'm very biased in this situation. And I was very happy to see that around the world, this was what was happening. A lot of major destinations around the world were fusing culture and tourism. And at the policy level, and I saw, countries such as like Iran and the usual suspects in Europe, but then countries you would least expect. And I started to realize we've turned the corner. Something is happening here, and it is a global phenomenon. The world is fusing tourism and their heritage and their culture. Something big is about to happen. I've seen a couple islands in the Caribbean do it, and I was very happy. I can't remember if it was Turks and Caicos or Cayman. I think it was Turks and Caicos who fused culture, and they also used sustainability, which was fantastic, because it made me realize they get it and they understand how the three need to work interchangeably. Here in Barbados, I don't think we were ever that. At one point, we went with tourism and sport about 30 or 40 years ago. And then we are back, we just went to plain tourism, and then we're back to the usual suspects of tourism and international transport. And that's something that had been done back in the 90s, a little bit archaic. I think when we fuse tourism with heritage, we are signaling to the world that we get it. We understand the importance of this future, and we understand that this could be an economic driver. If these two ministries could fuse, and we could come up with a cohesive, comprehensive plan that would be synergistic, and it would be easier to manage both industries and come up with something and pass legislation and policy, et cetera, for the two fused together. I do believe, yes, that for Barbados right now, based on the potential we have as a cultural heritage destination, I believe Barbados has such diversity and such scope and potential that would work for Barbados right now, if those two were to go hand in hand. So that's the answer. The long-winded answer to your question is yes, Miguel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hall.
All right, well, we are over time now, and as you all know, I'm ruthless with my time management at these sorts of things. So thank you very much, Carrie, for your presentation and your discussion. Absolutely fabulous. And we could do a whole 2 days just on tourism. And really, that's one of the things that has been incredibly exciting about the last 2 days, is that each one of these sessions has really opened up a broader set of questions and dialogues that we need to undertake moving forward. So thank you again, Carrie, very much. Thanks everyone for your questions. That brings us to the end of the program. I'd now like to invite the CHF team back up to close out our 2-day session. Thank you all again for your attention and dealing with me as your moderator for the last 2 days, but we'll invite James and Sydney up to close us out.
Hi everyone. I just wanted to say a few words and just mainly to add my thanks for the contributions today. They've been really fantastic, in addition to obviously the day we had yesterday. From our perspective, in terms of gathering information, this has been incredibly useful. The first thing I do when I get home is I'm going to watch the entirety of the 2 days all over again. But just the notes we've taken over the last couple of days have given us an incredibly sound basis for the exercise that we are now beginning. You will remember that at the beginning, we put up some questions on a slide and opened a discussion about what questions we should be asking. I'm not going to go into great detail on those questions, but it is self-evident that we have identified just over the last couple of days many of the places that we would want to consider as part of this exercise. We will, of course, be revisiting all of those, and we will be reaching out to all of you in the coming weeks to discuss further what other sites we should be considering as part of this exercise. As part of that process, can I please ask that if you do have any documentation or links to documentation, heritage at risk registers, etc., could you please send that to Sydney and myself, because that would be tremendously useful. And of course, as I say, we will be speaking to you over the coming weeks, and we can also collect further evidence when we speak. We talked and we asked in our initial presentation about economic models that we might want to pursue. There's been a lot of discussion about that. That's something that I found particularly interesting when we talked about issues of taxation and subsidy, etc. Again, that'll be something that I'll be very keen to discuss in person over the coming weeks. I particularly enjoyed it when we've talked about the engagement of stakeholders and who those stakeholders should be, including the people who are making decisions as part of the planning process. And I'm particularly interested in exploring how it is that we engage politicians, how we engage the public, how we engage the people who are involved in the planning process, planners, people who make who approve planning decisions, etc., to make them as interested and excited about preserving heritage as we all are. And of course, there is the ongoing issue of generating public support through effective communications. That's something else that I think we will all need to consider as part of this process. And then finally, the need for effective documentation. That's something that I think we will need to consider as well, which is partly why I'm asking for you to send me whatever information you have about the documentation that has already been done. But on that note, to me.
Yeah, so just to kind of reiterate what James has said, and that it's been an incredible, 2 days of useful discussion, for us in launching kind of our bit of the project now, and we will certainly be in touch with all of you, and we really do hope that you get in touch with us and email us with any documentation, any thoughts, any kind of answers to questions that have been raised, but also new questions or anything that you think would be useful for us to consider as we move forward, thinking about heritage sites, education, training, and how we can help.
And I will just put the slide with our contact details up.
Yeah, so that's for both of our contact details. So please take a note of that, write it down, or picture screenshot, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon. I've kept a relatively low profile during the conference, but for those online, my name is Peregrine Bryant, and I'm a conservation architect and a fellow trustee of the Commonwealth Heritage Forum. And it's my pleasure, though actually really tinged with sadness, on behalf of the Commonwealth Heritage Forum, to bring this conference to an end. And I think all will agree, indeed, it's evident from the comments received during the last 2 days, that the conference has been well received by all who attended in person and online. This is thanks to the quality of the speakers who led our discussions on the management of heritage policy, Planning Policy, Climate Change and Tourism, given by Dr. Charlotte Andrews, Kara Roop Singh, Dr. Shireen James Williamson and Kerry Hall, respectively, whose stimulating presentations led to a vigorous and productive exchange of ideas. So many, many thanks to all the speakers, as well as those who contributed to the discussions and commented, and indeed all those who attended. Let us all aim for this to be a prelude to a really productive collaboration. As you have heard from Philip, we expect to benefit shortly from an extremely generous grant from the Hamish Ogston Foundation, which will help drive forward the ambitious plans for working on buildings at risk across the Commonwealth, with buildings in the Caribbean being an early focus, and indeed the trigger to this conference. We are very grateful indeed for this generosity. Could I also give sincere thanks to our patron, Their Excellency Sir Rodney and Lady Williams, for attending both days unflaggingly. Thank you, Sir Rodney. And also to His Excellency the British High Commissioner, Scott Thurston Wood, who attended the opening yesterday, and his Deputy Tom Hines, who has been a great help from the British High Commission, and Alexandra Cummings, who represented yesterday the Ministry of Culture, for honouring us with their attendance. We are also extremely grateful to the British High Commission for their valuable assistance in funding this event, and indeed to the museum for loan of their excellent projector. No offence to the projector previously lent to us by the High Commission, which was rather too small. We give enormous thanks to the National Trust for hosting the physical event at Wildy House, and in particular to Denise and her team for the efficient and friendly way they have managed everything. Thank you to Tara Innes from University of the West Indies and the Caribbean Heritage Network for all her help, support and advice. We certainly hope to continue to liaise with her and both bodies as we move forward. And I must not omit to thank Philip for driving this event forward so effectively, and to Sydney and James for their part and their presentations. And finally, I would like to give a really heartfelt thanks to our Master of Ceremonies, Brent Fortenbury from Tulane University, who has worked tirelessly before and during the conference, and I think you'll agree has chaired our sessions brilliantly. So to all of the above, can we have a round of applause in the room, and echoed and amplified, I know, if silently, by all those online. Thank you. Till the next time.